our nation needs, where we're doing it correctly, where we could be doing things wrong, and what your views are as witnesses to help us determine the recommendations that we send on to the Minister. Now, in accordance with the Committee's resolution of the 31st of July 2025, this hearing will be broadcast on the Parliament's website, and the proof and official transcripts of the proceedings will be published on the Parliament's website. Those present are advised that filming and recording by the media is permitted during the hearing. However, we ask that members of the media, present or listening, report the Committee's proceedings fairly and accurately. There is a Commonwealth agency appearing before the Committee today. I remind officers of the Commonwealth agencies that the House and Senate have resolved that an officer of a department of the Commonwealth shall not be asked to give opinions on matters of policy and shall be given a reasonable opportunity to refer questions asked of the other two superior officers or to a minister. These resolutions do not preclude questions asking for explanations of policies or factual questions about when and how policies were adopted. I now welcome the witnesses from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade to give evidence today. For the Hansard record, would you please state your names and the capacity in which you appear before the committee?
Thank you, Chair. David Woods, Chief Economist of Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade.
Good morning. I'm Jan Hutton. I'm the First Assistant Secretary for the Pacific Integration Division in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade.
Thank you. I'll just quickly introduce myself. Steve Georgianis, Federal Member for Adelaide and Chair of the Migration Committee.
Louise Miller-Frost, Member for Boothby.
Cameron Caldwell, Member for Fadden.
And of course we have our Secretariat, Kathleen McGarry. Although the Committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. So thank you very much for your submissions to the inquiry. I'll now invite you to make a very short opening statement of a few minutes and then we'll proceed to questions and just a informal discussion on the inquiry itself and things that you think or things that we may ask of you to tell the committee. If there's something that you can't answer, that's fine. You can come back to us. So you'll be sent also a transcript of your evidence and you'll have an opportunity to request corrections of transcriptions at the end. On that note, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I propose not to linger too long in terms of opening comments, just being conscious that we only have, I think, around 30 minutes. The one point that I would make at the outset would be that from the perspective of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, that we see migration as being a very important policy tool for us to pursue Australian national interests, Australian prosperity and Australian resilience as part of our foreign policy and our trade policy agenda. I think probably the two, there's a lot of devil in the detail, but if I was to lift it up to a high level, I'd say you can think of this in really two broad categories. The first broad category would be to think about how migration and migration policy features as part of our trade policy agenda. Again, that's in the context of creating economic opportunity for Australia and Australians. And secondly would be in our strategic agenda, how we think about migration in pursuing our strategic agenda and our priorities, particularly in the context of the local, our neighbouring regions. Ms Hutton with me is obviously covering the Pacific, which is a key part of how we think of a key geography when we think about migration and our foreign policy agenda, and similarly Southeast Asia as well. So a trade agenda and a strategic agenda broadly, again a lot of detail sitting behind that, but I'd propose maybe to stop there with maybe also a plea for indulgence of the committee that I'm appearing here at late notice. My colleague, my specialist on migration, is out injured with an accident and 2 broken ribs, so please be gentle on me today.
No opening statement from me, Chair, but very happy to take your
Excellent.
questions.
I might kick off with a couple of answers, but we wish your colleague a speedy recovery.
Thank you.
One of the questions I have, how does DFAT assess the risk of trade and diplomatic, repercussions when we make changes to Australia's skilled migration program? How are they perceived by partner countries when we look at particular regions, and perhaps, for example, at the moment we're looking at Iran and there's no visas that are being processed, etc. Very different situation, and I don't need you to comment on that. But how does what are the risks diplomatically in terms of repercussions when we change Australia's skilled migration program and are perceived by partner countries as inconsistent with existing international commitments?
It's a big question, Chair. The way I would probably think about that is, of course, you framed it in terms of skilled migration. Of course, when we engage with our partner countries, is typically across the breadth of our migration program, and so there are many other elements to it, the permanent migration program, and then the many different visa streams that sit within the temporary visa program as well. I think clearly an important part for us in engaging with our partners, and from the perspective of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, obviously a lot of the work that we do is also engaging back directly into the Canberra system, into, with our colleagues in Department of Home Affairs, the Department of Education, Department of Employment, etc., to really connect what's happening domestically with the way that then those policy changes will be received diplomatically and by our partners, and also by the way in which, and a key part of framing that will be the extent to which they are consistent with our treaty obligations and our legal obligations. Clearly, the starting point from our perspective as good public servants will be that whatever policy changes that we're entering into need to be consistent with our legal obligations. We do that not by deference to partner opinions, but simply as good public servants. But we also know that then does provide the framework for how it's received, how we present any changes to our partners. It has to start with the fact that we are consistent with our legal obligations. I think beyond that, typically, this is sort of the normal working operations from the perspective of this department, where there are changes that are made, and that's natural and normal for a sovereign country such as Australia. Then we need to be engaging early with our partners to provide them as much context for the changes that we're proposed to make, and to offer them as much opportunity as we can to provide comment and provide us with the feedback. I think that's probably, but I know, Ms Hutton, whether you want to add to that?
Just a word on the Pacific in particular, if that's of interest, Chair, but absolutely our Pacific Island country partners in Timor-Leste, they expect Australia to comply with international legal obligations and hold us to account, just as we hold them to account. When it comes to migration with the Pacific and Timor-Leste, it's primarily temporary migration under our PALM scheme. We do have permanent residency pathways with the Pacific and Timor-Leste through our Pacific Engagement Visa, as well as our Fallapelli Union Visa. Some of the more advanced economies are taking increasing access of skilled migration pathways, Fiji in particular. What I would say in general, though, across migration, whether it's temporary or permanent, it is strategically important to Australia's engagement with the Pacific and Timor-Leste. They want more mobility and engagement with Australia. We are very focused on providing our Pacific and Timor-Leste partners with choices, we call it. So it's always a sovereign decision on how they wish to take advantage of mobility pathways for them. But I would say consistent feedback and appreciation for providing our partners with more choices and more options. And certainly I'd come back to the point that it's in Australia's national interest to have that increased engagement between our people. It integrates our economies and it makes our bilateral relationships stronger.
Thank you. I'll have one more question that I'll hand over to my colleagues. How does DFAT view the role of international students in terms of contributing to the shortage of skilled migration in that pipeline? But also, how does that benefit how do international students benefit our soft diplomacy? And we've seen a history of soft diplomacy through people that have studied in Australia, have perhaps done PhDs, doctorates, spent time in Australia, maybe even working, then going back to their nation. Has there been benefits out of international students? And I'm not just talking about the last 4 or 5 years, but historically in this nation, where we had the Colombo plan, a similar plan at the moment. Many people have studied in Australia, have gone back, have become diplomats, leaders. How's that benefited the country, and do you see that continuing to benefit the country in future, especially through our international intake of students?
Let me start on that one. Thank you, Chair. I think your question provides the germ of the answer. When we think about students, international students coming to Australia, we do think of that, I guess, as providing two key benefits. I'll mention the other benefit, of course, and that would be the economic benefit. International students, of course, are such a core part of our particularly our higher education system, a huge part of what is one of Australia's major exports in terms of education. By far the biggest part of our service exports. So there's certainly the key part there of international students providing an important part of a diversification and a resilience story for an Australian economy. But the second is exactly as you say, Chair, that we do see the flow of people, the movement of people as providing a stronger basis for the bilateral relationships which is enduring. It's for that reason, of course, you mentioned the Colombo plan from the 1950s, whereas Australian students going out. Of course, we now have had the new Colombo plan for some years now, which is precisely designed to maximise that soft power by bringing in students. I think we've now had roughly around 100,000 students come through the new Colombo plan into Australia to spend their time here before returning to positions of real influence in some cases. I can think of some countries, and if I was to choose one country that I know of, be Mongolia. I know it's far removed, but where the number of Australian students who now appear as senior members of government, as ministers, are very well disposed to Australia, which underpins the relationship between Australia and Mongolia. I picked that one country only because I spent time in North Asia, but I know it's one that's replicated throughout the countries that are closer to us, particularly here in Southeast Asia. And so I think certainly from the Australian government's perspective, that that soft power dimension of having students coming in, spending time here in Australia is an incredibly important part of what we want to achieve through our foreign policy and our strategic policy engagement with the region.
Chair, if I could just add briefly, the fact that Australia has a world-class education system is a huge strategic asset for us in the Pacific and with Timor-Leste. Australia isn't the only country that offers education opportunities to our Pacific partners. Other countries do, including China. But on the whole, our Pacific partners in Timor-Leste, people, they want to come to Australia and access education opportunities here. Our scholarship programs, like our Australian Awards, are highly coveted, hugely successful. As you said, Chair, many of the leaders in those countries today have spent time studying in Australia, whether they're community leaders, business leaders or political leaders. Many of the leadership and ministers of those countries, as I said, have studied in Australia. It's not just one way, though. We are very encouraging Australian students to also spend time in the Pacific. And Chair, as you may know, Australia is also the largest education partner in the Pacific itself. We're the largest contributor to the Pacific's regional university, the University of the South Pacific, where more than 4,000 graduates receive qualifications every year. So it is two-way, but it's a huge asset for us.
Thank you. I'll now hand over to Mr. Caldwell.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for being here this morning. Just in relation to the new free trade agreement with the EU, has there been any calculations or any modelling done that DFAT has about how many people will come to Australia as a result of the innovation mobility pathway arrangements that are included in that EU free trade agreement?
Look, so I'm going to have to take that one on notice.
That's okay, yeah. You may or may not have this as well. In your submission, you note that Australia has made commitments in relation to people movement and temporary entry into our country in 17 of 19 free trade agreements. On the latest figures that you would have available, what percentage of those people who enter under those free trade agreement arrangements would be overstaying their visa?
Yeah, look, I think that is one a question which would be best directed to the Department of Home Affairs.
You can take. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's. I mean, Home Affairs, of course, are the ones who are responsible for the border integrity and the question of people who overstay the visas. So I think if I could direct you to Home Affairs on that one.
Well, I'll try and give you one that you might be able to answer.
Sure.
Jen, this one might be for you. In the Fellapili, is it pronunciation, deal in relation to the Tuvaluans, 280 Tuvaluans per year can relocate to Australia through a ballot system. It's not tied to skills, occupation, workforce shortages, etc. Can you just talk us through what you see as being the strategic or economic benefit to Australia from importing effectively a random intake of that kind of cohort that's not connected to labour market need?
Thank you very much. Yes, the Fellapili visa. It was introduced as part of our groundbreaking Fellapili Union with Tuvalu, and in fact it was a core component of that. Underpinning the Fellapili visa is this concept of mobility with dignity. It is capped at 280 visas a year. This is our first year of that visa pathway, and we just hit that 280 visa cap in April. The ballot for the next year commenced on 1 May. You're correct, it is a ballot system, and that's very deliberate, and it was something that was agreed with the government of Tuvalu. That visa pathway is deliberately open to any citizen of Tuvalu, so it doesn't discriminate between gender. There isn't a skill requirement, there isn't a geographical requirement. The ballot is a random ballot, but the ballot is just the first step in the process. So ballot winners then need to translate that ballot into a visa, which means that they need to comply with all of the criteria associated with that visa.
So, I mean, it's probably a bit too early to say, but obviously some concern from the Tuvalu end of things is that they're losing maybe skills to Australia, but vice versa, there might be a perception from our end that we're not actually getting any skilled value out of that program. So how long do you think it would take before we got some data around what those impacts would be at either end?
It's something that we are keeping very close eye on and in constant engagement with the Tuvalu government. So as I said, it's the first year 280 visas have been granted. We know some of the first visa holders are already in Australia. Some of them are unskilled and some of them have higher skilled levels. Tuvalu is a participant under our PALM scheme, so they already have access to unskilled pathways. Tuvalu chose not to participate in the Pacific Engagement Visa last year because it was the first year of the Fallapelli Union. As part of the Fallapelli visa, there isn't a requirement for visa holders to demonstrate or have evidence of employment ahead of arriving in Australia. But we know to thrive and succeed in Australia, employment opportunities is critical. So we have a in-country support service as well as support services back here in Australia where we are supporting Fallapelli visa holders to find employment, and that is employment open to unskilled or skilled levels.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms Louise Miller-Frost.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for coming today. I just want to understand a bit more about the PALM scheme. So I understand it started in agriculture and now it's sort of broadened out to other sectors. Are there other sectors that are under consideration to further expand it at the moment?
Thanks very much for your question on PALM, the Pacific Australian Labour Mobility Scheme. So it is an unskilled and semi-skilled scheme. You're right, it does allow for employment in sectors outside of agriculture, including in meatworks and aged care, for example. The Australian government has stated its commitment to continue to grow and strengthen the PALM scheme and to create more opportunities for Pacific Island countries and Timor-Leste. At the moment, we have a pilot running in the early childhood education and care sector, 14 Papua New Guineans in Australia at the moment as ECEC workers in the Northern Territory under that scheme. Certainly, our ministers regularly, whenever they engage with Pacific counterparts or Timor-Leste, hear calls from Pacific and Timor-Leste for more opportunities under PALM.
And so for those people working in semi-skilled areas like skilled areas like the aged care and ECEC, I'm assuming that the employers here in Australia must be upskilling them. Is there concern from the employers in Australia that they're basically upskilling people who then will automatically leave?
So PALM, you're right, is a circular mobility scheme. So the improved employees in that scheme understand that. They take on PALM workers knowing that they will return to their home countries. That's a really important element of the scheme, particularly for the home countries. And the skilled component means that we're able to offer something under our PALM scheme that other labour mobility programs don't offer, and that's a skilled element. So in the past, when we didn't have PALM workers in those more semi-skilled areas, the primary benefit to our partners was through remittances, and that's still hugely important to many of our partners. But the fact that PALM workers now can return home with skills, whether it's aged care skills, for example, is an additional benefit that's highly valued. The Australian government supports our PALM partners to develop those skills ahead of arriving and taking up employment in Australia. So the ECEC workers, for example, all had formal Certificate 3 qualifications ahead of taking up employment in Australia. But certainly our experience is, and our approved employees tell us, that there is lots of on-the-job training. And Meatworks in particular is an area where often our PALM workers start at a very baseline level, but over the course of their 4-year employment, many of them rise and take on much more additional responsibilities.
Thank you. We have, because of time limit, we've got Ms. Sandra Fernando, the member for Holt's, on the line, and she has one last question as well. Ms. Fernando? Ms. Fernando?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Oh, great. Thank you.
You need to speak up, though.
Sorry, thank you for coming in today. I just have one question, one quick one. Are there any examples where Australia has successfully used international engagement to support skills transfer or capacity building in Australian industry?
I'm sorry, do you mind just repeating that question one more time?
Are there any examples where Australia has successfully used international engagement to support skills transfer or capacity building in Australian industries?
I don't have a good answer for that.
Can I just clarify? I think you're talking about skills transfer and benefit to Australia. Is that correct?
That is correct. Specifically, in our Australian industry.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer. Yes, including under our PALM program, for example, in our horticultural sector, for example, around 50% of citrus employees rely on palm workers to fill those harvest labour needs. And what we find is that many of them establish relationships with particular countries, or they've hosted palm workers who they have trained on the job or developed relationships with, whereby those palm workers will then return after a mandatory offshore period. So they are highly coveted by Australian employees. We have some data that suggests that palm workers are in fact 40% more productive than other sources of temporary labour.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hutton. Our time for this session has now come to an end. Thank you for coming today and giving evidence, and thank you for your submissions. You'll be sent a transcript of your evidence and will have an opportunity to request corrections to transcription errors. If you've been asked to provide some additional information, which I believe, from memory, some stuff on the FTA and
Yes.
Question on notice on pathways in the EU agreement, please send it through to us by sort of mid-June if we can, or a bit earlier. Sorry?
We'll be in touch.
That'll be great. If you've been asked to provide any further information, please do so. The Secretary will be in touch within due date, as we said. You'll also be sent a transcript and have the opportunity to correct any errors that you may think may be in the transcript. Once again, thank you very much for appearing today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks.
Just before we go on to the next one, I'd like to welcome Mr. Rebelo, the Deputy Chair, who's just joined us. And just for the committee's sake, we have a tight time frame today, so I'll keep it on time and ask that you keep your questions direct and a couple of questions each, if we can, to try and get through all our witnesses today. I now welcome witnesses participating in a primary production roundtable to give evidence. The witnesses are joining us through remotely. The witnesses participating today are from the National Farmers Federation, someone's here in person.
Yeah,
Thank you very
Michael,
much.
Chair, thank you.
Australia Pork Limited, who are in video conference, Australia Dairy Farmers via video conference, and the Australian Meat Industry Council via video conference as well. Now, for the Hansard record, would you please state your names and the capacity in which you appear before the committee? And perhaps I call on the National Farmers Federation first, who's here in person, just your name and the capacity you appear before the committee.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Michael Peter Pyers, and I'm the General Manager of Workplace Relations and Legal Affairs with the National Farmers Federation.
Thank you very much and welcome. The Australian Pork Limited.
Thank you. Mrs Tanya Pittard, I'm the General Manager of Policy and Industry Engagement at Australian Pork, and I appear today as a witness.
Thank you and welcome. The Australian Meat Industry Council.
Sorry, there were more witnesses from pork.
Sorry? So one moment, because we've got different types of papers here. So we're working off this sheet, not this one. Correct. Mr. John McGovern on air?
John should be here. He's based in Western Australia, so I've just given him a call to make sure he won't be far away.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
That's okay. And we now go to the Australian Dairy Farmers.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name's Nathan Pope. I'm the Policy Manager for Australian Dairy Farmers, and with me today is Michelle Lawrence.
Can we ask Michelle to just identify herself and tell us in the capacity she's appearing before the committee today? Michelle?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity today. My name's Michelle Lawrence. I'm a dairy farmer from Tasmania, and I also chair the People and Community Policy Advisory Group at Australian Dairy Farmers.
Thank you. We now go to the Australian Meat Industry Council. Anyone here from the Australian Meat Industry Council?
Tim Ryan's here, but he seems to be having trouble with his microphone.
I can see him on the screen. Would you like to introduce yourself, Tim, and tell us your name and in the capacity that you appear before the committee?
Good morning. Want to hear me now?
You need to speak up. We can barely hear the volume. You need to turn the volume right up.
How about now?
That's better.
Good morning. Sorry about the audio problems. My name's Tim Ryan. I am CEO of the Australian Meat Industry Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think that's it for the round table. Can I just say thank you for appearing before the committee. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter, and it may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. Thank you for your submissions to the inquiry. I'll now invite each organisation to make a short opening statement of no more than 2 minutes each, and we have to keep the time strict, otherwise we won't be able to get through you all, and then ask the questions that we need to ask to get a good idea of where you're coming from. I think if you can make that short statement, then we'll open up for a very general discussion where we'll be able to hear more from you. And I think we'll start off with Mr. Peter Peers from the National Farmers Federation, who's here in person today, and thank you for appearing, Mr. Peter Peers.
Thank you, Chair. And also, just to indicate, my name is Michael Pyers.
Sorry?
My middle name is Peter.
Ah, okay. Mr. Peers.
Pyers, P-Y-E-R-S.
Pyers.
If you remember Billy Pyers, the jockey, it's
Excellent.
the same name.
I'll ask you then to... I might get you to pronounce my name after as well.
We'll have a contest. Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear this morning and address the committee and make submissions. You have the submission of the National Farmers Federation with you. Look, we need to go, in my view, to the words in the terms of reference. Value of skilled migration to Australia. And value is a subjective thing. I mean, what you and I perceive as being value can be entirely different. And it can be influenced by a range of factors, including the background of the individuals or individual or groups concerned. It can be influenced by culture. It can also be influenced by education. But one of the things that cannot be argued about, in my view, is the role of that migration has played in the socio-economic development of Australia since World War II, and the value that migration has brought to the table in that regard. I mean, yes, I know that there's debate in the body politic at the moment regarding numbers of migrants and things like that. But from the NFF's point of view, the numbers are not an issue. What can't be denied is the fact that immigration has brought value to the economy, to the country, and everything else from that point of view. So I'll leave my opening remarks there and look forward to answering your questions.
And we'll come back for a discussion.
Yeah.
I now call on the Australian Pork Limited, one person to make a quick statement.
Thank you. I'll just make some very brief opening remarks. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Within the pork industry, so the Australian pork industry is a very domestically focused industry, and the migrants settling and working within our industry are highly valued. The pork industry employs more than 36,000 people within Australia, and we have the capacity to also employ even more than that with more local processing and local small goods manufacturing. The industry, however, does face significant challenges attracting and retaining staff, and we require an increasingly skilled workforce due to the technical and integrated nature of our supply chain. These shortages are exacerbated by diminishing labour supply within regional Australia. The most recent survey of our pork producers found that approximately 60% reported a shortfall of staff. The survey results that indicate that the labour deficits have been primarily caused by poor social perceptions of our industry, but we work really hard to demonstrate that a career within the pork industry is highly rewarding, requires a highly skilled workforce. The migrant labour who are contributing to our industry are highly valued. They are highly skilled. Many of them come in with veterinary skills and a lot of education. We work with them, we support them, and they become integral members of their farm workforce, but also their local communities. Some of the technical skills that are coming in are people with technical husbandry and animal husbandry skills, particularly around the breeding, farrowing and animal care space. We also have significant skills within that biosecurity space, as well as nutrition, growth and productivity. So there are innovations in automation, but we've also got highly technical roles, particularly within that genuine emissions reduction and abatement space, where we need people who are able to operate the quite technical machinery that operates those emissions reduction systems within a farm. So we're really grateful for the opportunity to come and speak with you today and answer any questions, and to talk about the value of the varying forms of labour that are contributing to our industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We now go to the Australian dairy farmers. One person from there to...
Thanks very much, Chair. Appreciate the opportunity.
Mr. Pope, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, no relation to
the Pope,
the one we commonly know. So, look, dairy farming is a continuous production system, and unlike sort of seasonal agriculture, cows must be milked and cared for every day. So, modern dairy farms, require increasingly skilled workers. Roles involving herd management, animal health, machinery operation, environmental compliance, and other advanced farming systems. So, Australian dairy farmers, continue to prioritise attracting and training local workers. However, many dairy regions do have experiencing very tight labour markets.
Public hearing.
Ageing populations, and of course, there are shortages. So it makes it difficult to source local workers.
Sorry, someone's got their speaker on and it's coming through and interrupting Mr. Pope's presentation.
Thanks.
So just make sure you're all on silent. Thank you. Mr. Pope, you have the floor.
That's it. Thank you, Chair. So look, skilled migration has really become an important complement to the domestic workforce in dairy. It provides some significant social, cultural values to regional Australia. But we do need the right people at the right time with the right skills. And look, we've seen some really great examples through the well-managed migration programs such as PALM scheme, where that's been utilised by Australian fresh milk holdings in New South Wales, and that program has supported a workforce for that business that it strengthened the organisation, but also the local community, schools, sporting clubs, churches, the regional businesses. So certainly it has actually provided some really big benefit. And look, we've seen migrant workers come in through permanent residency programs. They've undertaken farm management and ultimately moved into farm ownership, and now they're demonstrating value to the long-term viability of the industry. But saying that, we do have some framework that doesn't really reflect some of the realities of modern day farming, and we've had recent submissions around making sure that that from entry-level workers through to senior herd managers are available, to our industry, because it's not just the technical nature, but it's also the ability to put cups on teats. So it's important to make sure that we do have that widespread, and also I guess some of the associated timeframes and the costs associated with the programs. We're price takers as an industry, and it's important for us to be able to actually manage those costs and be able to properly budget for that. If we see long time delays in terms of getting people on, then generally our workers and our farmers have to pick up that time and work to fill in those gaps. And so it's important to make sure that we have that sort of people first mentality, making sure that we've got the safety of our farmers and our workers, but we do get who we need at the time. And another aspect is also ensuring that the frameworks allow for the opportunities to bring people in. At the moment, we're currently trying to work through a situation where we've got 12 various families from sort of Denmark, the Netherlands, Canada, that want to actually come to Australia and own and operate dairy farms. These are people that are highly skilled in their home countries, but we don't have the ability to actually bring them in and give them the confidence of residency for them to actually make that investment. And I think that we're sort of working through, and obviously Home Affairs and the various agencies are helpful, but it's aspects like that we need to sort of tighten up to support our industry. And I'll
Thank you.
Leave that there.
Thank you very much, and we'll come back to some questions. I've got a couple of questions for you, but before we do that, we'll ask Mr. Tim Ryan from the Australian Meat Industry Council to give us his presentation.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and keep this to 2 minutes. So very much welcome the opportunity to present to you this morning on this important subject. Our organisation represents the post-farm gate meat industry. That includes meat manufacturing, processing and small goods makers. Meat manufacturing is the single largest manufacturing employer in the country now. So it's a really important and significant part of the broader economy, but also underpinning food security. Across various businesses, approximately 1/3 of our workforce comes through a migrant labour program, be it skilled or unskilled or semi-skilled, but that varies widely across the different business types in the industry, with some businesses relying on more than 50% for their workforce needs through a migrant labour program. The people that come through these migrant labour programs play a really important role in the communities in which they live, and they often integrate very well in the local workforce. But nevertheless, we are heavily reliant on skilled migration to meet critical skill shortages. However, the current settings are really incompatible with the needs of business, to make significant investment decisions and innovate. And particularly without assured labour supply, we do see huge challenges on the horizon. It's critical that this inquiry acknowledges and considers not only skilled migration settings at a policy level, but also how these instruments are administered to provide the necessary skilled workers, but also promote business confidence, particularly when we're navigating large exogenous shocks, be it changing seasonal conditions such as drought in Australia, or particularly changes in global settings when we've got very rigid migrant labour mechanisms. It's really hard to navigate these really big shocks to our industry. Skilled migration is and will remain a fundamental part of our industry and the ongoing viability of Australia's food security and our export competitiveness. Targeted, responsive and well-supported migration labour settings are essential to ensuring Australia remains competitive globally, but also that critical industries like meat processing can continue to grow. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to a discussion, an informal discussion, Q&A, and a discussion. I might kick off. I've got a couple of questions, and we'll do 2 questions each and see how time goes. And feel free to jump in as well if you want to answer a particular question that's been discussed. I might go to Mr. Michael Pyers. Regarding the, obviously we've heard from everyone, and pretty well everyone says that they are reliant on a lot of skilled migration. In terms of skilled migration and the numbers that are coming in, and we've heard about animal husbandry, the meat industry. The committee only just visited Thomas Foods down in Adelaide recently and saw the incredible workforce that they have down there, and how reliant they are on migrant workers. Obviously we've been hearing a lot over the last few days about the migration debate. If we were to cut the numbers or change the system and reduce the intake across the board, how would that affect the Farmers Federation and your members?
It would affect our members significantly, Mr. Chair. And the reason why I say that is that, first and foremost, there is a substantiated skill shortage within the agriculture sector. That number, I can't confirm it off the top of my head, but it's in the ballpark of about 170,000. So if you play around with the numbers, there's going to be less people, there's going to be less people to do the work and so forth and so on. Then you've got the question, what are we going to do? Are we going to say, okay, with skilled, is it going to be skilled migration? Is it going to be unskilled migration? I mean, the reality is that if you cut the numbers in the PALM scheme, you're going to have less people picking fruit, and we don't want to see, and frankly, we don't want to see that happen. So that's an important consideration for lawmakers to consider. From our perspective at the National Farmers Federation, skilled migrants bring considerable expertise to the table in terms of operation of, say, highly complex machinery, management skills, and it can bring a different perspective of how to do things to another part from other parts of the world, which we can all learn from. One of the things we're doing, for example, at the National Farmers Federation is that we're starting to work with the French Embassy to try and have an interchange, for want of a better word, between Australia and France in terms of French students coming out to Australia, possibly Australian students going to France and so forth and so on. And we believe that that sort of interchange is key and important as well. So that's why that's why, in terms of what I said earlier, it's really not the numbers. The numbers are important, don't get me wrong, but the numbers are not as important as what you do, where you allocate the people, and so forth and so on.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to add to that particular answer?
Yes, Chair, if I could just support with some numbers from the pork industry. So around 56% of our labour is from overseas. It's a very diverse workforce. It's a critically important workforce, even within the most recent conversations about the impact of the global trade disruptions on industries. That workforce access, any disruptions or inability for the workforce needs to be met by our industry creates a significant both animal welfare as well as biosecurity risk. Our industry operates along a continuous supply chain. We don't have the capacity to hold animals on farm for a significant period of time. Our entire system relies on animals moving through the farming system, into transport, and then through into the processing sector. So the migrant labour is an absolutely critical component of our productivity. It's an absolutely critical component of our industry being able to operate, and around 56% of our labour is coming from overseas. So they are an absolutely crucial component to our industry being able to operate. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to add?
I would like to add that this is fundamentally about sustaining food production in regional communities. I concur with the previous two speakers. We need the right people in the right places for our farms to operate. Without the right people, we'll have other issues and maybe reduce production. So it's very, very important to us in dairy to have the right people as well.
Thank you.
Chair, may I
Mr.
add to
Pope
that as well?
Mr. Pope.
I think that was Tim. Thanks, Tim.
Sorry, who was that? That was Tim, Mr. Ryan. Sorry, Mr. Ryan from the Meat Industry Council.
Thanks, Chair.
And
thanks,
just for your information, the committee visited Thomas Foods last week and looked at their operations and what they were doing with skilled workers.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chair, and I'm sure that was a very enlightening visit. I suppose it doesn't necessarily need to be a hypothetical question. I think we're seeing some of the challenges at the moment with the impact on our administration and settings, really restricting how we operate today, not necessarily if we were to reduce numbers in the future. Particularly, I think at the moment, the delays in getting a skilled migration visa process, some of which is up to 12 months, really inhibits any business decision making and future investment. If I was a business around the world looking to build an abattoir, the ability to get a skilled workforce up and running and tap some of these migrant labour programs would be a major barrier to me deciding to invest in that business in Australia. But also the inability to rely on timely visa processing means that we can't respond to changes in global trade, manage the disruption, say, in fuel supplies of late, but also respond to change in seasonal conditions, which then impacts farmers and creates blockages throughout the system as well. So it really inhibits us today. If we were to see a reduction in visa numbers or migrant labour numbers, it'll just compound those effects even more.
Thank you. If there's no one else, I'll go to my Deputy Chair, Mr. Reblow.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks for appearing before the committee. There have been a few sort of references to visas. I was just hoping you can clarify and break down the types of visas that you're referring to. For example, what proportion are holiday makers, what proportion are other types of visas? Maybe we'll take that as the first question.
Well, insofar as working holiday makers are concerned, off the top of my head, and this is off the top of my head only, I think the number that's being talked about was in the ballpark of about 80,000 or so. As I said, don't 100% quote me. But working holiday makers are important because they are an integral component of the skilled or unskilled or semi-skilled workforce, along with the palm people, the people coming in from the palm countries who are equally important.
I can add
Mr. Ryan.
Statistics to that. Nathan Pope here. So Dairy Australia, the 2024 Power of People survey showed that we had 42% of farms use overseas workers compared to 18% in 2020. So that's quite a significant increase. 31% of those farmers had hired workers on working holiday visas, 17% on employer-sponsored visa programs, and we have 1% that has used the PALM scheme. So quite a varied split.
Within the pork industry, we have 57 of our pork industry businesses who operate through the pork industry labour agreement. So they're bringing in staff through the pork industry labour agreement. The other visas that staff are coming in, and most of our staff are highly skilled, permanently employed. So they're on the 482, the 186 and the 494. I'll have to take on notice getting you the actual figures for the percentages of the use of those visas and the numbers. But yes, as I said earlier, around 56% of our industry is utilising labour from within the migration system, using the 482, 186 and the 494 and 57 businesses, which will be the larger businesses, because the requirements within the pork industry labour agreement are actually quite comprehensive, and they take a significant investment by the business to meet all of those requirements in order to bring labour in through pork industry labour agreement. Thank you.
Anyone else like to add to that?
Just thank you, Chair. Just from the meat industry side, the two main mechanisms are the PALM for unskilled and semi-skilled, and there's about 11,000 people in meat industry jobs coming through the PALM scheme at the moment. The other visa data is a whole lot harder to collate. It's a bit messy, but there's approximately probably 10,000 people coming through a skilled migration pathway. The main one for us is the meat industry labour agreement under a 482 visa. Thank you.
Anyone else? No, we'll go to the next question. Miss Louise Miller-Frost.
Could I do one more?
Miss?
Yeah, just a follow-up on that.
Follow-up question from Mr. Rebelo.
So the reason I was asking about the types of visas, so under the temporary skilled migration program, we haven't seen too many farmers. I think it's less than 300 farmers that were actually granted visas in 2024-25. And so when you compare that to the 500 ICT managers and almost 1,700 cafe and restaurant managers, the reason I ask about the question, the previous question, is because we're wanting to make sure that we're bringing in migrants that are going to the right areas. And so do you have confidence that the migrants that are coming in are going to the right areas for your industry?
Who would like to kick off with that one? No?
Chair, if I could maybe make a comment on that, please. John McGovern from Australian Pork.
Mr. McGovern.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I think in relation to the question is that the people in the pork industry that are bringing employees in under labour agreements are targeting them for specific businesses and therefore specific areas. They predominantly come from countries with a background in the pork industry. So there's quite a large Filipino and South African contingent that come in under the pork industry labour agreements, and that generally is the result of them having significant experience in pork production, because it's a highly specialised industry. So we need people with specific skills in that industry. So those people that come in are skilled in raising pigs, and those people are brought in to go into a specific area, and they are predominantly in country areas for obvious reasons. And as been alluded to earlier, is that they do make a significant contribution to the local communities. In some cases where schools are closing in rural areas, they have made a significant increased those numbers attending those particularly primary schools, and has and integrated into the community very, very well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Miss Louise Miller-Frost.
Thank you very much. Look, I'm absolutely fascinated about the very high level of
Sorry, we can't hear that.
Am I on?
Miss Louise Miller-Frost has the floor.
Is my microphone working?
Thank you.
You can hear me now? Lovely, thank you. Look, thank you all for appearing. I'm absolutely fascinated by the very high level of migrant worker usage in your various industries. I'm particularly interested, going back to that difference between the temporary visas and the permanent visas, and that high use of palm workers and holiday workers and the like. Is that because that works for your industries? Is the use of those visas because it works for your industries? Or is the use of it because it's too hard to get the permanent migrant visas happening for these workers?
Michelle.
Mr. Pope.
I would say that the process is long, complex and costly, and that can be an inhibiting factor in attracting the people that we need. In the dairy industry, we tend to use probably the working holiday maker to fill a gap as we seek a longer-term employee. We've argued in our OSCE, or requested in our OSCE submission for to maintain senior dairy cattle farmer. It's been recognised as a skill level 4. We actually need that position to be recognised on the CSOL now so that we can employ people earlier. I think we need long-term career pathways to come up through the industry. When you operate in Australia, and I guess my lived experience is, we actually work across multiple disciplines. Farming in one country can be very different to another. So we can attract people from a lot of countries with experience in dairy farming, but we need them to come to Australia and experience our system and the high levels of animal welfare we have, the high levels of regulation around food safety, and we can really, really benefit from that. I guess there are so few we are so short in our skills that we're not taking away from our local workforce. They are genuinely additive, and they do bring cultural and social perspectives to our local community and fostering tolerance and understanding of what's happening elsewhere in the world. So, yeah, I would definitely say we just need that process to be easier and more smoother, seamless.
I might just add there that, we do have some seasonality in terms of requiring additional staff for short periods, such as overcarving or, during peak periods. So there is that sort of that curve of need and demand within our industry. So you may actually tap into more of a working holiday maker as opposed to the long term, but you need to have that basis of good skilled workers within the system and within the farm to be able to actually train and bring up those people, because if you rely too heavily on the short term, then you do actually wear down your farmers with the training and the inductions and all that sort of stuff, having to sort of go through that churn each time. So it's important to, again, as we sort of said, have the right people there, but you bring in the others as you need to support our production.
There is genuine training fatigue at the moment from farmers who are continually trying to bring people in. But there are some very genuine success stories of even working holiday makers who come in. They love it. They find their place in the world, and then they go through the dealer pathway. And that is so very critical and important to us.
Just to add to that as well, completely agree. The people that come in under these various visa programs play a really important role in the communities which they live, but also the workforce. If there are more efficient and streamlined ways to make that pathway to permanent residency easier and with greater certainty, it would allow businesses to also invest in those people further, knowing that they can continue to be in the workforce for a longer period of time, and also give those workers a lot more certainty as well.
Can I also indicate...
One of the things we find is that we are so short is in that people are, they're almost, they're going from one, I don't know if I can use the word poaching, but we are so short on staff that you'll bring someone in. It can be very expensive for a farmer to bring someone in on a pathway and then for another farm to take them, and it would be great to have that cost shared if that happens.
Thank you.
From the pork industry perspective, we don't have so much of the seasonality. So we've got a very continual, constant supply chain. And obviously then with 56% of our on-farm labour being from migrant workers, you want to be able to have them go through those training processes, go through the induction, get to know the farm practices, and to really be able to settle themselves within the community. I think you asked about seasonality. We certainly note that particularly through the pillar, it is an extraordinarily expensive process that involves a significant commitment by the farm and the farm business to put everything in place to bring workers in through the pillar. So obviously they absolutely want to retain them. And also like to make the point that this is not inexpensive labour. This is labour that in a lot of cases costs as much or more than utilising local labour if it was available. So we would like to absolutely see these pathways to be very effective, very efficient. We'd like that certainty. We'd like to see those people coming in on the agricultural visas to work in the agricultural industries absolutely prioritised through the processing of those visas, because you really do need that certainty, you do need that labour certainty, and you do need to be able to confidently make the investments in your farm business in order to be able to attract, retain and support those workers coming in. Thank you.
Mr Pyers, did you have something you wanted to say?
Look, I just merely wanted to indicate NFF's full support for the previous speakers and what's already been put.
Thank you.
Can I ask one more?
Very quickly, because we've also got a couple of others as well.
Sorry, I will be very quick. Mr Ryan, you commented that it sounded to me like you were saying that when we had the conversation about potentially cutting of numbers, that actually there is still a shortage now, and in fact more workers would mean growth in the industry. Are we being contained by a lack of workforce, and all of your industries could in fact grow and prosper more if you had more workers available?
Yeah, absolutely. One, there's, I suppose, the size of the workforce and our ability to grow with that workforce, but as much, the other part of the problem is just the efficiency of how the visa programs are managed. So if a business has to wait 12 months without transparency on the status of a visa or where it's at or what the blockage is, that business can't invest in building a factory, taking orders from customers. You're really stuck in the mud. And meanwhile, you've got all this volatility happening around you. It really restricts how you can operate. So it's partly the size of the workforce, but also the ability to respond to market conditions. It's also worth pointing out that this fundamental need for migrant labour is complementary to our ability to employ locals as well. So first and foremost, we'll always look to the local workforce as a priority. It's much easier and it's a lot more sustainable long term and has more surety. But the ability to employ migrant labour also then adds security to those local jobs, because it underpins the whole business viability. If a business can't operate efficiently, effectively has to shut the factory doors. So it's not necessarily at odds with each other. The two domestic and migrant labour programs are very much complementary.
Thank you.
I thought just an interesting statistic also for your consideration. So within our emergency animal disease planning and activities, we've also obviously had a look at what happens when you end up with significant shortages or you end up with an abattoir having to shut. So for the pork industry, 85 to 87% of our pork is processed at just 6 large export accredited abattoirs around Australia, and we know we've done a significant amount of work and can very confidently say that if those abattoirs have a workforce shortage or some other shortage that requires them to shut down for a day, for any day that an abattoir is shut down, that is a 4-day recovery period. So you can imagine that if a abattoir has a significant workforce shortage or workers can't get into work, people get sick, you end up with shorter shifts. 1 day down is 4 days recovery, and that for the pork industry means that within 4 days, with a 16-day recovery, you actually can't catch up again. So that ability to confidently plan and have contingency plans in place to maintain that supply chain flow is really critically important, and it is very difficult at the minute with the significant shortfall of workers right across not just the farming sector, also the transport sector, but then also into the abattoir and processing sector.
Thank you. Mr. Caldwell.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone. I might be grossly oversimplifying this, but there's been 1.4 million people come into this country in terms of an increase through net overseas migration. I find it extraordinary that we're sitting here and every single one of you is using the terms need, shortfall, shortages, etc. So the system is clearly not working to its optimal level. So I've just got a couple of questions. One is picking up on a point you made, Tim, about local skilled labour. And so the first question to all of you is, is the government doing enough to actually drive skilled labour from the Australian workforce, and how could that be improved? And then I'll move on to a second question just about what we could do to the migration program.
Who's taking the call on that one?
Just on thanks, Chair. Thanks for the
Ryan.
question. So,
No.
Sorry, was I speaking over you, Chair?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I suppose on the domestic front, it's really about skills and people. Certainly on the skills side, we have seen an overall reduction in funding for training. So that's impacting some of it. But overall, the regions, the broader trend, I suppose, of moving to more metro areas, the regions being less populated, does mean that there is certainly overall shortages, particularly with the growth of other sectors such as mining in some parts of the country. It does draw people away from what would have traditionally gone into a meat processing career. So certainly we've got competition challenges from other parts of the economy, particularly over recent years with unemployment being so low, kind of since COVID really. We have faced overall shortages, but then on top of that, we've had the additional impact of reduced skills and training funding from government too.
Can I just...
I might just add from a dairy... Oh, sorry, Mr. Pyes, go on. Thank you, Chair.
No worries, Nathan. I just wanted to take up that point. And I mean, it's certainly skills and training that are important, particularly in developing the workforce in regional areas. For example, at the National Farmers Federation, we're developing an agricultural trade apprenticeship scheme, which we hope to have finalised in about 18 months or so, if we can bring that into enough TAFEs and enough regions, right around the country, that may sort of give us a bit of an uptick from the skills point of view. But also, for me, you've got to look at skills or local skills. I mean, it's not just within the industry, it's not just on farms. I mean, regional towns need cafes, they need offices, it's the Keynesian multiplier effect. So we need to look at the skills and what skills are required in various towns and regions from that point of view as well.
I might just add there, I think,
Mr. Pope.
Thank you, Chair. The right people with the right skills at the right time is very important, but I think one of the aspects that we find a little bit frustrating is the Skilling Australians Fund. So when you bring in a worker, you are paying a certain amount of money depending on the length of time you're sponsoring them. So 3 years generally is around $14,000. Now, that fund, that money goes into the Skilling Australians Fund, which is to assist with the development of skills of locals. Now, for us as dairy, we don't actually see any programs or any dairy-specific training that goes or that is provided through that money. We have no oversight or there's no transparency of how much we're paying as an industry and then how much we're actually getting out of that towards local training. And I think this is quite frustrating for us, because also if we bring in someone and then that person then moves to another company, that receiving company also pays that SAF levy on top of what's already been paid. So there's almost double dipping, and yet we still don't see the benefits that are coming out of that program. So to answer your question, we would certainly love to see, more of our local workers, being trained and being brought through the system, to actually increase the industry production and longevity. But we need to actually have these parts clear, transparent, and then those pathways to be able to actually employ these people.
To add to Nathan's point, we also have the same duty of care to our employees in terms of safety and training, and we can't just bring people in from overseas and not provide them with equal opportunities to be safe on farm, to understand their job and to increase their skills.
And that comes out of the farmer's pocket, where we'd love to see, if the SAF levy is available and we're actually paying it, that potentially that goes towards some of this more training, dairy specific, so we can actually have locals, but also we can make sure that we cover off on what's required, for on farm, for those workers that we do get in from the international areas.
One of the recommendations that Australian Pork made in our submission as well was around the SAF, and very much feeling that it should be invested, or the proportion being paid by the agricultural sector should be hypothecated and spent on the programs, training that is required to really upskill and support initiatives within the agricultural sectors, because there is a significant amount of money and it is not really utilised in a way that is either transparent, and there's no opportunity for the agricultural sectors that are contributing to the fund to actually participate in monitoring or any evaluation of the effectiveness of how that funding is being used. Thank you.
So
I completely agree.
Yeah, thank you. And so I guess one of the takeouts from all of that discussion would be decoupling the SAF from being a funding source into free TAFE, for example, and actually hypothecating it to more industry-specific and directly benefiting training. Would that be a good take-out recommendation from this?
I think it's a fair
Yes.
100%.
And one of the things as well is the committee is probably getting the feel for, there's no one size fits all for agriculture. There's significant diversity across the many commodities and the many industries. But one of the things that we are noting is that there is a significant increased requirement for industries to be investing in training that is specific to their industry. Within Australia Pork, obviously we're lucky. We are a research and development corporation, as well as being the peak industry body for the pork industry. So we are utilising levy funds to develop online training, face-to-face train the trainer programs and others in really important areas. However, that SAF funding could make a significant contribution to supporting the agricultural sector to have really the much needed upskilling and training opportunities specific to agriculture.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. I've got a question, then I'll go to Mr. Reblow, my Deputy Chair, who might have follow-on. In terms, and my question is following on from Mr. Caldwell's a bit, in terms of transferable agriculture skills internationally, so we're talking about skilled agricultural workers that have skills. Can I ask, does Australia adequately recognise those overseas skills, qualifications, the competencies for your industries? And if there's shortfalls there, is there something that perhaps we can meet those shortfalls in when people are coming up over from overseas, fairly highly skilled, but the recognition to allow them to work in that particular skill on that particular rate and all the other conditions that come with that skill, the shortfalls in that area for those overseas skills migrants?
We have actually been doing quite a significant piece of work around that stock person competency and the skills shortage within our industry. And certainly we are hearing a lot that there is not adequate recognition of some of the skills, particularly for people who've undertaken courses at that higher level in the veterinary sciences, animal husbandry space. There's still significant requirements for them to come in, both through state regulations and we do love that. Sorry, I shouldn't use sarcastic language. There's a significant lack of harmonisation around the expectations around people meeting skills requirements in each state. So you can find that people who've come in with a veterinary degree are still expected to go and do a certification 3 level training in order to be a recognised stock person within Australia, or they have to demonstrate that they've worked for a business for a year, for example. So having opportunities to recognise those skill sets. We are also finding in the emissions reduction space, there's only one qualified technician within Australia who's able to operate the machinery and the technology required to have the covered biogas extraction lagoons within our manure management system. So we have a significant number of farms who are putting quite considerable capital investment into covering their manure pond or lagoons. That allows the extraction of biogas that can then be used to produce electricity and other significant benefits. But actually bringing in people with the engineering and technical skills to support those systems is very difficult.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to add to that? Mr. Pope?
Thank you, Chair. I might sort of take it a little bit further. I mean, we've in terms of skills recognition, I mean, we're at the moment trying to work through the process to actually bring very highly skilled leaders from, as I said, Denmark and the Netherlands and Canada into the country, because they've actually, they see an opportunity with us to bring their families, bring their skill set, buy a farm, operate the farm, and contribute like a normal family farm. The investment's not going overseas. They want to relocate and do that, but the visa pathway for them to be able to do that and actually have reassurance that when they buy the farm that they're not going to get, the visa's not going to get suspended within 3 years, or they have to go back. They need that reassurance. And I mean, we've got families that are leaders. I mean, some of them are, the organic dairy farming. One of the leaders in Denmark wanted to come here, but the difficulty is we don't have an investment visa, and the innovation visa that was available. The baseline to be able to be recognised for that is so high that there is this gap. I mean, we're sort of going through the situation at the moment, going, well. Is there the only way to have these people come in is they buy a property, put in a manager, that manager then sponsors them for 3 years to get a residency visa for them to work on their own farm, to then actually, have their family and their children sort of run and operate it like a normal family farm, which for us is, you can imagine it's very frustrating. And unfortunately, we've got, those farmers are now looking at Lithuania or New Zealand. Potentially, we're losing this knowledge and this capacity and this new skills coming in by an inflexible sort of system. And we've had discussions with Home Affairs, and we've written to the Minister as well, trying to highlight that, this is a bit of a gap, but we've got an opportunity to grow the industry and bring these people in with their experience, with their innovation. But yeah, there's just it's a gap that we need to try and address.
Thank you.
Can I add to Nathan? Sorry.
Can I just ask a follow-on question to Mr. Pope before we go on to Ms. Lawrence? Point taken on that issue. And in terms of the business visa or investment visa, what you're saying is the benchmarks are too high for it. Because there is existing visas that you can apply for when you're buying a business in Australia and you want to operate it. But maybe the benchmarks, I take it, is what the difficulty is?
Yeah, so the investment visa no longer exists. So we've got people that want to come in at, in Victoria, obviously, there's a lot of farms up for sale. And so they're looking at these areas. And that visa and the sponsorship by state government doesn't exist anymore. So we're having to look at a residential visa, which is that
business visas. There are visas.
We do have business visas, but it's different to coming in and giving them the recognition and the safety of actually being given residency. So a lot of that is determined or required on actually working for 3 years against with a business to get a residency visa. Now, these we've got families that are sort of, they're in retirement age, but they want to invest for their children and bring their families across. And that's a bit different to an investment where you're putting in $1 million just as not as an owner-operator.
And that takes me to another question in your views on this, and I'll come to Ms Lawrence in a moment. The EU has a type of visa called a golden visa.
Yep.
Where people, if you invest, I think it's, I don't know, each country's got different investment figures. It could be $1 million, $2 million. You automatically, you go through a stringent process, but you automatically get your visa. Would something like that help in the agricultural industry when people do want to come over and run a business and continue producing things that we need and that we export and that bring value to Australia?
Look, absolutely. But I think there is a risk there. And I do believe that has been trialled before and potentially, there is a risk there for that being abused. So it would need to be very, very pointed in the requirements and what it's targeted at. Particularly for investments, say, as Tim mentioned, ensuring that there's some surety around coming in, investing, and the timeframes involved, etc. So I think that there would be definite demand there if it could be linked to ensuring that the industry itself is increasing its productivity and its development and obviously production.
Thank you. Ms Lawrence, and apologies for cutting you off.
No, sorry, that was my fault. I just wanted to come in support of Nathan in terms of bringing these families in. I think as an industry, we totally undervalue the pathway from entry level through to management level and ownership or equity partnership or however that forms in two ways. One, on farm, the value of the skill of cupping up a cow is completely undervalued. If we get that wrong, we impact animal welfare and we impact the productivity of the farm. So there are many things we do that when we're cupping up a cow. Secondly, it's the skill transfer of those managers or farm owners that they're able to give to their other employees because they understand the entire system on the farm. As I said earlier, we're a multidisciplined system. We cover HR, we cover animal welfare, science. Essentially, we are a science, technology, engineering, maths operation. And the value of those people to training and to productivity is undervalued.
And I might just add, Chair, if that's all right,
yep,
that we have statistics that a family farm, they generally spend 75% of their revenue within 100 kilometres of that farm. So the benefit to the community and obviously the flow-on effects, you have a family come in, there's childminding, there's schooling, there's nursing, all of that actually goes to help those regions and really strengthen the economy within those areas.
Thank you.
Chair, may I add?
Mr Ryan.
Just to add from the previous comments, if you go into a modern abattoir like the one you visited recently, there's a high level of sophistication, engineering and technology in those establishments. And you see it, the industry back here, particularly AMPC, is investing a lot in STEM and attracting local talent and building that talent and getting them into our workforce. But the specialisation of some of this technology requires us to compete and access the global talent pool. So we do need to make sure, particularly for these really specialised skills like the one Tanya had an example of before, that we can have a vehicle to bring them into the country and get them in the industry back here. We are investing in the domestic workforce, but some of these really specialised capabilities require us to get out of Europe or North America or wherever that person might come from.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. I'll now go to Mr. Rebelo, who has a question. We have about 11 minutes to go, so I'll ask that you ask one question each, and then we'll come back if there's still time.
Sure. My question, hopefully a very quick one, building on Mr. Caldwell's discussion about the SAF levy. Can you tell me, so can you think of any examples, or have you seen an example of the SAF levy funding coming back to the agricultural sector?
There's very little transparency. I suppose that at best we could say maybe indirectly through people in regional communities being able to undertake courses in some of the trade spaces that can then benefit farms. We know that electricians, many farms now employ electricians for a number of days a week simply because of the complexity of their sensor systems and the other systems that they're running. Pigs, in particular sows, require quite consistent temperatures, so you need to have all of those temperature and monitoring systems and fan systems and others. So probably there would be indirect benefit to the agricultural sectors through SAF, but there's not a lot of data or transparency relating to how many apprentices within rural or regional areas are accessing the free TAFE and then continuing to work within their local communities.
Thank you. Everyone else was shaking their heads, but is there anything else that anyone would like to add?
No, I think generally it'd be great to have far more transparency about where this money ends up and ideally aligning it back to the industry which contributed.
Thank you.
100% there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Caldwell.
Thanks all. And look, just as we close, I just want to say thank you because you've actually been extremely informative this morning. It's been a fantastic roundtable. One of the things that I found, which I just commented to Mr. Rebelo, was there's been a really high level of discussion around the skilled workforce that's required in your sectors, and I probably didn't have a full appreciation of that, and I think broadly speaking people see some of the agricultural sector and the food production sector as being dominantly unskilled. So that's been really enlightening for me. So thank you for providing that information. I think it's quite obvious to me that in relation to the migration system, you know, we've been saying that the numbers are too high, the standards are too low, but I think it's probably fair to assess they're also not landing where they need to land. Do you agree with that third part of my assessment? And is there anything that you think we could do in terms of project-specific or region-specific visa settings to improve the workforce stability for your sector?
Certainly from pork, and I'm sure that the other sectors would agree. You know, we're very keen to collaborate and provide information and data into some of those departmental information gathering and the different data sets they're using to set some of the levels and the needs. We find it quite difficult to get information about our industries into those processes to allow for that differentiation between the skill sets required. So there's a significant contribution that the agricultural sector can make to help inform some of those overarching, I guess you'd call them overarching policy documents that then inform some of these decisions. Often we get a chance to be consulted when it's further down the track, but what we're probably a little bit concerned about is how do we have a better opportunity to provide information into those initial landscape and assumption setting processes.
Thank you.
Excellent.
I think from one point of view, Mr. Caldwell, you hit you hit the nail on the head insofar as you said that whatever happens with the numbers, or whatever happens with the numbers, they're not landing in the right spot. We're not getting the result that we need. And I would agree with the previous speakers, particularly from Australian Pork, saying we need to participate actively.
Can I just interrupt there for a moment? Can I ask Mr McGovern to turn off his microphone? That's better.
Okay, thank you. As I was saying, it's obvious that the numbers aren't landing where they need to be, because we still have a problem. We still have, at the end of the day, we still have a skills shortage. We still have fruit to get off the vine, animals to harvest, and so forth and so on. So I think anything that we can do to work together on target, maybe targeted programs, specific training, whatever it needs to be, I think must be a worthwhile thing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just to add to that, if I may.
Mr Ryan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. With two things, there's the overall quantum, and certainly our industry is always changing. We go through peaks and troughs, largely driven by seasonal conditions and on-farm conditions that we need to respond to. So for me, it's as much about the ability to respond in a timely and efficient manner as much as the overall quantum of the workforce. Yeah, there's shortages, but I think the pressing issue for us at the moment is the inability to respond to a fast-changing world. Like just the global environment is so challenging to navigate at the moment, but yet our settings and the ability to expand our workforce really hold us back. So it's as much the settings from a policy setting, but also the administration of any visa programs that is really a concern for us. In terms of targeted visas, yes, the regions need people, but our metro workforce and employers are also feeling the same pressures. So it's not just a regional issue. Anyone operating an abattoir or a small goods factory in one of the cities is also facing the same workforce shortages and skill shortages.
Thank you. If I could just ask one, in the last few minutes that we have, one final question for each and every one of you. We're obviously looking at skilled migration and how we can better the system, and we'll be coming up with recommendations, which will then go to the Minister. Those recommendations then are taken on board, developed into policy, whatever. And I'll ask from each one of you, from each industry, not every one of you, if you had a magic wand and there was one recommendation you'd really like to see in our report and in our recommendations to the Minister, what would it be? And I might kick off with Mr Pearce.
Okay, and that is an exceptionally good question, Mr Chairman. I think for me the magic wand must be more people, right place, right time.
More people, right place, right time.
Yeah, it must be that. It can't be anything else.
Thank you. I'll now go to the Australian pork industry.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's about ensuring that agriculture and its post-farm operations are really given that highest priority within the visa system, and allowing us to have programs that specifically target the areas where we have shortages, and letting us work with you to inform where those shortages really are. So it's based on real-world, actual data rather than assumptions that are created outside of our industries.
Thank you. And in real time, I take it?
Yes, yeah. Please.
We now go to the Australian dairy farmers.
Thanks, Chair. And I know Michelle.
And I'm sorry for putting you on the spot as well.
That's all right. Look, I think the committee's actually hit it on the head. Looking at the SAF levy, making sure that there's transparency and bringing that, funding back into training for our particular industries. Also, that yourself, Chair, hit it with the investment visa. So, again, bringing the right people in. That we can actually have those transfer of skills and that, the ability to actually ensure and give them some surety around being involved in our industry. And I'm sure Michelle will add from a farmer perspective as well.
Thank you.
I was going to say this is fundamentally about sustaining food production Our goal would be a stable, skilled, sustainable workforce from entry level through. So it needs to be a simple process that we can access the workers when we need them. Waiting 7 months for someone to come in or longer is incredibly taxing. So yeah.
So the recommendation would be shorten the time frame when you're waiting for someone to come in.
Or just make sure we've got the pathways for people to be there earlier so that they're in there at the right place. So I guess the loss of senior dairy cattle farm worker was huge for us, because by that way we've got the pathway for people to come up into the higher level roles.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And our Mr. Ryan from the Australian Meat Industry Council, your recommendation would be?
It's hard to pick one, but if I had to, it'd be how visas are processed, so times and transparency, and how it really stymies business planning, and particularly if government wants to promote productivity, this would be an absolute game changer for our industry. We could plan with the surety to make investments and business decisions going forward if we knew the visa system was efficient to accommodate that. But alongside that it's the policy settings around those visas as well, which is really important, getting them right. Thank you. Look, that brings us to the end of this session. Can I thank you all for participating today? It was a great session hearing from you, hearing firsthand your trials, tribulations in the skilled migration area. It's given us a better idea of the agriculture industry, farmers, etc. Certainly, your views and the submissions will be taken seriously. And thank you for those recommendations at the end, because we can discuss them when we're coming up with recommendations for the Minister. Can I also just thank you for appearing, as I said today, but thank you for everything you do for our nation. Australia's one of the best economic stories in terms of where we are, and that's due to our agriculture industry who have benefited this nation for many, many years and will continue to do so. And it's the area, I think, my personal view has always been that, we look at a whole range of other things, but agriculture has always been there, will be there, and will benefit this nation. So thank you for everything you do for us. It's appreciated by us. Even city folk like me understand that to put food on the table and the exports that we do wouldn't happen, and that economic growth wouldn't be there without you guys. So thank you. Thank you for coming today. You'll be sent a transcript of your evidence, and you'll also have an opportunity to request any corrections if you feel that there's transcription errors. If you've been asked to provide any additional information, the Secretariat will be in touch with a due date after the transcript is available. If there's anything else you want to forward to us, please feel free to do so. We may call upon you again at some stage, individually or as a group, towards the end of the inquiry itself. Once again, thank you for appearing before us. The committee will now take a very short 15-minute break, and we're due back here at 10:30 on the dot. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Hansard.
Thank you, committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Hansard ready? All good? I now welcome Dr O'Sullivan from Sustainable Population Australia to give evidence. For the Hansard record, would you please just state your name and the capacity in which you appear before the committee?
I'm Jane O'Sullivan and I'm the Vice President of Sustainable Population Australia.
Thank you. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and it attracts parliamentary privilege. So thank you for your submission to the inquiry. I'll now invite you to make a short opening statement of no more than 5 minutes, and then we'll proceed to a discussion and a Q&A. And I'll hand over to you, Ms O'Sullivan.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you today. Sustainable Population Australia is an environmental advocacy organisation concerned about the impact of human population growth on environmental sustainability. We argue Australia's population can't grow forever, and the lower the peak population, the better for our quality of life. So why persist with a rapid population growth strategy that's not sustainable and is creating more problems than it fixes? Stabilising our population requires reducing immigration to around 70,000 per year net gain. This is enough to maintain Australia's current humanitarian intake and to fill genuine skills shortages and family reunions. It's around the intake in most years up to 2005, so it's by no means a radical position. What is radical is the huge experiment in mass immigration since 2005. We think it's time to acknowledge that experiment has failed and it's time to end it. It has not given us a younger, smarter, more productive workforce. Instead, it generated skills shortages, suppressed productivity, gave us the highest youth underutilisation rate in the OECD, buried state governments in debt in their futile efforts to catch up with infrastructure, and brought housing unaffordability to crisis point. We are not anti-migrant. We have no interest in the race or ethnicity of people moving to Australia, and we want all of them to have the best chance of finding good, stable employment and a welcoming community. But we believe those outcomes are much more likely when migrant numbers are low than when they are high. Low migration is pro-migrant. This brings us to the subject of this inquiry, how to get the best value for Australia from our necessarily limited immigration program. Along with most Australians, we're frustrated at the rather banal level of political discussion in this area. Migrants now make up nearly half of young adult cohorts, so it's entirely unsurprising that they occupy half of the jobs in some sectors. This is not proof that we depend on ongoing immigration. It's just our demographic reality. Nor is Australia's multicultural character threatened by lower future immigration. The Parkinson Review found that skilled migration program is not working. For each skilled migrant, we get at least 2 family members who are usually unskilled, admitted either as a secondary applicant or a later family reunion. Among the primary skilled migrants, only half find jobs that use their qualifications. Regional sponsored and points-based visas have the worst outcomes. Just last week, a study by E61 Institute revealed that regional sponsored migrants earn 40% less than employer sponsored, so they're doing low skilled jobs. And 80% of them end up living in capital cities. Also last week, a report for the Migrant Justice Institute found that 2/3 of temporary migrant workers are illegally underpaid. This begs the question whether claimed labour shortages are actually about suppressing wages. And this week, it's reported that 1,500 nursing graduates in Victoria are unable to find entry-level nursing jobs. As with engineering and trades, employers are demanding experience and not hiring either migrants or new graduates. If the response to the skills shortage is focused on entry pathways, we wouldn't need migrants. But the responses to Parkinson so far have been barely shuffling the deck chairs. In our submission, we make several recommendations that would dramatically improve skilled migrant outcomes and would be politically popular and would clarify new migrants' prospects of permanent residence, rather than luring them here under false pretences and channeling them into rorts. Firstly, we recommend that all skilled migrants should be employer-sponsored and initially temporary. The only real test for skills in demand is a job offer. This is the usual requirement in most other developed countries. The minimum salary threshold should be at least the median graduate starting salary for that discipline. If their qualifications should be recognised by an Australian professional body for them to practice, this should be done before they're issued a visa. The skilled occupations list and the points-based self-sponsored and regionally sponsored visas should all be scrapped entirely. There's no way of dressing these up as being either necessary or successful. Secondly, we suggest that foreign student enrolments should be no more than 40% of any course of study. If courses aren't attracting Australian students, they probably aren't career relevant and exist mainly for foreign students to get access to Australia's labour market. We support restoring funding to universities to compensate for lower foreign student enrolments. This will be a fraction of the cost of the infrastructure bill saved from lower population growth. We estimate each additional Australian resident costs federal, state and local governments about $150,000 for infrastructure. Thirdly, graduate visas should only go to above average students, those graduating in the top 40% of their cohort. Those graduates would then need to find a job that requires their qualifications and an employer willing to sponsor them if they're to stay on. Fourthly, movement to a permanent visa should require at least 5 years of appropriately skilled employment, as well as employer sponsorship at a higher income threshold reflecting their experience. Our submission makes a number of other suggestions and explains why common claims of the benefits of high immigration are misleading. I'd be happy to elaborate on any of those points for you.
Ms O'Sullivan, thank you. We've got your submission in writing, so we've got all that. It's here as evidence and it'll be on the record that you've submitted to us. I'd rather we open up for a discussion and have an informal discussion. We get to absorb more that way, I think. And I'll kick off with 2 questions, and then I'll hand over to my colleagues and we'll just see if we can answer. If there's some that you can't answer or you need to get back to us, that's fine as well. So feel free to say, I don't have the facts, figures, etc., but I'll get back to you. And I'll kick off with, and I've looked at your submission, but how are claims that, I suppose your claims are that there's oversupply, but how does that reconcile with the current skills shortages we're hearing from industry groups, from every sort of Chamber of Commerce? We just had the Farmers Federation in, all saying they're short of skills and they can't find local labour to fill those skills. So therefore their industries, without that skilled migration from overseas, takes a detrimental downturn. And that's been a common theme from everyone that we've spoken to. So what I want to get from you is to reconcile from your submission, the oversupply with the shortages that we're hearing. So where is that gap between the two, and what is there something we're missing or something that we're not being told by groups, etc.?
I think there's a number of factors going on. Some groups have a vested interest in high rates of population growth, so it's in their interest to exaggerate the need for migrants. Other reporting of evidence for skills shortages contradicts those claims, either by showing that really what employers are asking for is experience, and often very specific experience, which no new migrant can have because they haven't got Australia-related experience, and no new graduate can have. So we really need to be looking structurally at entry pathways in order to fill those skilled jobs. And there have been a number of changes in the structure of the economy over the last 20, 30 years that have narrowed those entry pathways and made emphasised just-in-time hiring, if you like, rather than pipelines of skills within an organisation.
Excellent. And my other question is, in your submission, you talk about immigration creating construction labour shortages by driving sort of housing demand. How do you think we should address that? And then taking into consideration there's about 300 and something odd thousand migrants in the last 12 months that came to Australia, 178,000 houses that were built. And we know that the 300,000 aren't individually going to go into a house, each one. Students go into student accommodation, or they share 4 or 5 families that come over, could be 3, 4 in a family. Basically, in terms of construction labour shortages, how would Australia address the existing housing deficits that we currently have by reducing, when you're reducing migration-driven demand, when we don't have the trades that we require for the construction of those homes?
Well, again, the lack of trades really reflects structural problems in apprenticeship programs. And I know the government's done a number of things to help that along, but it's still not enough. We're not getting that throughput. In terms of the amount of construction we need to do, that's really determined by the rate at which we increase our population. So obviously reducing the population is going to reduce the rate at which we need to build houses. Reducing the population growth rate, I should say, rather than the population itself, which is not going to be reduced anytime soon. Migrants up to now have been underrepresented in the construction industry. So the migration program has been adding to demand for housing more than it's been filling those shortages in construction. Australia has around 9% of our workforce in construction, and the OECD average is closer to 6%. So we already have a very high capacity for building houses compared with most other countries. So we don't have a deficit there. What we do have is a long edge in the demand side. So it's really not about a supply problem. It's really about a demand problem, and that comes from our very high rates of population growth. And as I said, we're getting, for each migrant that fills a skilled job, we're getting around 5 who don't, and they're adding to demand for all sorts of skills, generating more skills shortages than they are responding to.
And my very last one, just very quickly, in terms of a sustainable Australia, in terms of environment, our water needs, etc., what sort of pressures, are there pressures being put on by our migration in a country like Australia in terms of environmental pressures? And I believe that you've got some points in there about that as well in the report.
Yes, and we recently published a discussion paper on Australia's water security. All of our major cities and many regional towns are already struggling with water supply issues, and the major cities are resorting to desalination plants, which are very expensive, very environmentally impactful, and very technologically dependent means of providing an essential component of life, which is water for urban populations. So obviously the further growth of our major cities will need to be mainly satisfied through desalination, which is not a good solution for anyone. It's a huge energy burden, and it has a lot of environmental impacts. People talk about, it's just about distribution. We need to get people to move out into regional towns. Most regional towns can't take a huge increase in population without running into water problems. As for habitat loss, we say, well, we just need to build enough houses or build houses fast enough. There is a penalty for every new estate that we put on otherwise agricultural land or natural habitat. We're losing particularly coastal koala habitat at a great rate, and we don't think that there's a net benefit for Australia in continuing to increase the size and the footprint of our cities. Whereas growing up rather than out has more intensive resource needs, is more expensive per square metre of housing provided, and is not delivering the quality of life that Australians would choose.
In terms of emissions and Australia meeting its targets, is it sustainable with the migration that we bring into the country, or will that just make it more difficult to reduce the emissions and our targets?
Absolutely. The more we grow our population, it just moves the goalposts in terms of how fast we have to decarbonise every person's personal carbon footprint. So it adds enormously to the rate at which we have to roll out renewable energy infrastructure. It makes us more dependent on imports, and there's always an energy and climate impact of that trade. It just scales up everything in terms of emissions. So I think it's a no-brainer that stabilising our population is going to make it easier for us to meet our climate change targets.
Thank you. Deputy Chair.
Thank you, and thank you, Dr. O'Sullivan, for appearing before us. I've got a question. You've spoken about the challenges that migration can bring, especially mass migration when it comes to housing. Last night, you might be aware, the Coalition announced that if elected, we'd connect migration with housing, and in particular housing capacity. There's obviously a shortfall of housing in Australia. Do you think that sort of policy and radical intervention is necessary?
Well, firstly, I wouldn't see it as a radical intervention, but I would see it as a populist policy. From our position, simply being able to build houses fast enough doesn't solve the problem, because population growth is generating a lot of other problems. So I think other countries, particularly Canada, have shown that population growth can be very rapidly brought down just by slowing the entry of temporary migrants while maintaining the permanent visa quotas in order to transfer the temporary migrants who are already here to permanent status, and get the temporary pool down to something that is not flooding the labour market and is not leaving a lot of temporary migrants in limbo for many years trying to get a permanent visa. So the way to do that is to slow down the entry of new temporary migrants. And we think that, just bringing in skilled migrants because on paper it looks like they might be able to fill some skill shortages, but we know from experience that they never do, is a pretty silly strategy. So if we require them all to be employer-sponsored, then, if those employers are saying, we have serious skill shortages, we need to be able to access people from overseas, let them. As long as they're willing to pay a competitive salary that they would, otherwise employ an Australian for, we believe that the numbers who will do that are much smaller than the numbers of skilled migrants that we're currently bringing in.
I'll allow Mr Rebler, but I'm pleased you raised Canada, because part of the terms of reference are looking at models overseas, and one of them that we've identified is Canada. So we'll have a good look at that particular point that you just made. Mr Rebler.
We did include some information on Canada in the submission that you have.
Sorry? Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, what did you say?
We did include some information on Canada, some evidence
of
the impacts of their policy changes. Yep.
Thank you.
Dr O'Sullivan, the other question I had was in relation to the view that the current skilled migration system disproportionately favours short-term economic gains over long-term national planning. Is that something you'd agree with, and could you talk a bit to that?
The current system favours the short-term goal of boosting GDP growth figure. It does not benefit GDP per capita. It does not benefit workforce participation. It does not benefit productivity. The only benefit from a national interest point of view, and it's arguable whether it's a national interest, is the aggregate GDP figure. And it mainly boosts that by increasing debt, because the more houses you build, the more mortgages there are, and that money is basically brought forward and spent now, increasing GDP, but then we've got a higher proportion of heavily indebted households who are constraining their consumption in all sorts of other areas, which suppresses GDP. So it's, in the long run, it's not a win at all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Miss Louise Miller-Frost.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming along. So I come from the health sector, so obviously we have a fairly large migrant workforce in the health sector. And in the context of Australia's ageing population, we know that the working age population is actually predicted to decline over time at the same time that we have, particularly the baby boomer generation moving into retirement, and therefore actually needing those aged care services and health care services. So we have an expanding aged care health sector and a declining workforce. And we do rely on migrant workers to fill that need. In terms of what you're proposing, how would you see that we would address that issue?
Okay, so a few years ago I wrote a discussion paper on exactly this topic, addressing the ageing arguments. So yes, you were correct in saying that the proportion of working age people will go down a little bit as our population ages. You are incorrect in saying that we will have a shrinking workforce, because what has been the experience of all countries that have been going through this ageing process ahead of Australia is that workforce participation has increased to take up that slack. So people are, without any legislation, they're retiring later, or they are more likely to be working than not working, simply because the labour market is tighter. So we don't anticipate a shrinkage in the workforce as a proportion of the population. And by having a tighter labour market and a higher participation rate, you get a higher tax yield per working age person. So there's certainly not going to be a reduction in the tax is available to support healthcare and aged care. There will be larger numbers of people over the age of 65. There will probably be more people retired, although the deferral of retirement age, which has already been quite a few years since the year 2000, the average retirement age has increased, readjusts that ratio quite substantially. But the population who is actually in need of aged care places and intensive hospital use is not necessarily increasing as a proportion of the population, because as countries of age and as they've increased in longevity, what has tended to happen is that the years of healthy life have expanded and the years of old age disability have just been deferred rather than extended. So yes, healthcare will be a bigger part of the sector of the economy going forward, but education should be a smaller sector. Construction should be a smaller sector if we stabilise our population. And these things more than outweigh the extra spending on aged care, healthcare and pensions. So if we did projections of different rates of population growth into the future, showing that the costs associated with population growth are greater than the costs that could be reduced by making the age profile slightly younger through that immigration.
I guess I'm less concerned in this instance about the actual cost and more about the actual workforce. So at the moment we have 40% of nurses are migrants, and in the aged care sector 51% of staff are migrants, and frontline care is around 37%. That's a massive number of people that we are already now reliant on. And yes, I accept that obviously we are having longer lifespans, people work later, and, you know, the ideal life is that your period of disability and illness is, you know, at the end of your life is the smaller one. But the flip side of that is, and we're already seeing this, more people wanting support to stay at home, which is a fantastic thing because we want people to be able to, you know, live as independently as possible. That is also additional workforce. So we're already seeing that. We're already very reliant on overseas migration to be able to, you know, support that. And I accept your argument that the actual workforce doesn't shrink. That's correct. It's a percentage, not an actual number. But if we have more people actually in the retirement age and into those years that we know people do often use more of the health system and obviously the aged care system, where do the bodies come from to actually do the work?
So, firstly, the proportion of nurses really is only reflecting the proportion of migrants in those age cohorts. You know, if we're bringing in as many migrants as we've got school leavers every year, it's unsurprising that they occupy half of the jobs. So the other thing is that all of the sectors that rely heavily on labour hire arrangements tend to hire migrants because they're more exploitable. And aged care is one of those sectors that has been shown in recent reports to prefer migrant workers because they can coerce them into doing unpaid overtime and, you know, claw back the costs of visas, things from them, because they're vulnerable workers and then they're less able to stand up for their rights. We know that migrant workers are being exploited in all sorts of jobs like that. So the care sector, the horticultural sector, the meat workers, you know, there are a number of sectors that are really exploiting this capacity to make labour cheaper by preferring migrants over Australians. And unless we clamp down on that, then Australians aren't going to do those jobs because the industries deliberately make them unattractive for them.
Thank you.
And so we did have...
one last
sorry,
one.
I was just going to say we do have the closing the loophole to actually stop that labour hire issue. So, but I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Yes, there have been some good moves by the government in that regard, but so far it hasn't really changed things much. When, you know, recent surveys of horticultural workers, for instance, are showing that in most states they are being ripped off systematically.
Thank you. Mr. Caldwell.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Doctor, for being here today. It's wonderful to have someone of your deep thinking ability to be here to contribute to the committee. So thank you. And I've read a little bit about the work you've done in sustainable, you know, practices and how we can sustain the population and the work you've done through UQ. So thank you for that. Also, it's very important work and your value of the environment. Just generally speaking, do you think we've reached the point where migration-driven demand is actually undermining our living standards?
Yes. And I think that's a large part of the rise in support for One Nation. So if we want, if the government wants to win votes back from One Nation, they have to take these concerns of people seriously and realise that, it's not just because they're ignorant and unaware of the values of all these wonderful migrants we're bringing in. It's because their quality of life is actually being impacted by rapid population growth. Not by migrants because they're different, it's just by the number of people being having to be accommodated, which is really such a huge financial burden on state governments that they've been pulling back on other public services and, the access to various things is getting harder. Not to mention hospital ramping and, crowded schools and less green space in your neighbourhood. All of these things have impact on people's lives and have been for the last 20 years.
Just the net overseas migration we've seen under the current government's about 1.4 million over the term that they've been in office. You mentioned earlier, just in relation to effectively what I'd describe as pump priming the GDP with the migration settings. Can you just expand on that component a little bit more?
Well, I'm only speculating that Treasury's motivation in advocating high immigration rates, and Treasury does seem to advocate high immigration rates, is to boost GDP growth with callous disregard for GDP per capita or income distribution. However you analyse it, and the Productivity Commission has put out several reports on migration, finding that there's really no benefit for the average Australian worker. They had a report out in 2020, I think, looking at trying to explain why young people who've graduated since 2010 have done way worse than in the previous decade. And this is really due to the level of competition in the labour market that we've imposed on them through rapid immigration.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just very quickly, I'll go back to something that you raised earlier on when we were talking about the Canadian model and the fact that you were talking about maintaining our immigration numbers, people who come here already with a visa. In other words, they apply, their visa's given to them. For example, from 1949 right through to about 75, that was the way it was done. My parents migrated here, they had a visa, bang, they came here, they were permanent residents from day one. And you were advocating that earlier. Do you think that would be a good idea to perhaps look at some of the things that we used to do in the late 40s, 50s, 60s, right up to the 70s, where we'd look at the intake that was required to sustain us in terms, back then it was manufacturing, agriculture, etc. You work out what your quota is, you choose your people from overseas, they come, they're on a permanent visa, and then you look at it again every 3-4 years to work out the numbers. Is that what you were sort of advocating, going back to that particular?
No, that's not what I'm advocating.
Because you mentioned, and I've got the maintaining our migration people that are coming with visas, but stopping the temporary migration, people that come in on a temporary basis.
Okay, so
temporary
really
would be someone's coming in with
relation to Canada in their effort to shift quite rapidly in the population growth rate. They've been able to maintain their permanent visa quota for now because they're trying to get rid of this backlog of temporary migrants who are trying to get into permanent.
So how would that permanent visa be allocated? That's what I'm trying to get at. When they come here or before they've come here?
We advocate a substantial period of temporary residence before you qualify for a permanent visa. We don't think anybody should be given a permanent residence in Australia without being able to demonstrate that they're actually going to fill the role that they claim that they they
So
will
how
be
would
able
you
to fill.
demonstrate it if you haven't got a visa? You'd
On
have
a
to come on a temporary
temporary
visa.
Yes.
Okay. All right, I've got
But we
it.
need
I've got
to
it now.
make
So
it much
you're
more
not
clear to
advocating for a
people.
stop on temporary visas.
No, but
Okay.
we're saying
That's what I wanted to clarify. Yeah.
we shouldn't be giving permanent visas to people just on a points basis, because we know that most of them are not going to get a skilled job, and most of them are not going to stay living in a regional area. So they're really not fulfilling those reasons for which we gave them a visa. We can maintain an inflow of temporary skilled migrants, but we shouldn't do that at such a scale that most of the ones who want to become permanent can't, because they just exceed the number of permanent visas available by a large proportion.
Thank you. And one last question. In terms of some discussions and views from across, not just political parties, that there's some regions that we shouldn't be looking at taking intakes from. What would your views be on that? Some regions, countries that were perhaps
we don't support that sort of policy.
Okay. Thank you.
We don't support discrimination on the basis of ethnicity or country of origin. If we need to ration skilled migration places, it should be on the basis of English language standards and whether or not they're bringing dependents, because those who bring dependents are really diluting the net benefit to Australia. And we've also suggested that for a family unit to get permanent residence, all members of that family unit should be able to speak English. Because we know that the people who don't are not able to contribute in our community to the same level that the average Australian can, which means that we're importing an extra burden which is going to cost the health system and other parts of the economy more to support those people.
Excellent. Thank you. Ms Louise Miller-Frost. No. Thank you very much for appearing today. You'll be sent a transcript of the evidence and you'll also have an opportunity to request any corrections in any errors in the transcription, if there are any, or if you feel that there are any. If you've been asked to provide any additional information, the Secretariat will be in touch with a due date after the transcript is available. Thank you very much for appearing.
Thank you.
We now have the others here?
Yes, they are.
They're here, okay. Excellent, thanks. Is Hansard on or off?
Yeah, no, we're good.
I'll wait for the others. Who are the others? There's Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Excellent. Okay.
Lovely, thanks. Do you want to shuffle to the middle?
Shuffle to the... Yeah.
Sorry.
We get a good view of you that way.
It's just where my water glass is. So
Yeah. Excellent. I now welcome witnesses from the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry to give evidence. For the Hansard record, would you please state your names and the capacity in which you appear before the committee?
Certainly. I'm Dr. Jodie Trembath. I'm the Director of Skills, Employment and Small Business at the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry.
Thanks.
I'm Sushmita Kasturi. I'm a Senior Policy Advisor at the Chamber of Commerce and Industry.
Thank you and welcome. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. Thank you for your submissions to the inquiry, and I'll now invite you to make a short opening statement of a few minutes, and then we'll proceed to a discussion and a Q&A. Just before I do that, I'll let my committee introduce themselves.
Hi, Louise Miller-Frost. I'm the member for Boothby in South Australia.
Committee Secretary.
Kathleen McGarry, Committee Secretary.
Not important.
Leon Rebello, I'm the Federal Member for McPherson on the Gold Coast and the Deputy Chair.
And Chair of the Committee, Steve Georgianis. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to appear today on behalf of the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. ACCI is Australia's largest and most representative business network, representing industry associations across every sector of the economy, and state, territory and local chambers of commerce and the businesses that they represent in towns and cities and suburbs right across the country. I'd like to make 3 points at the outset. First, skilled migration is central to Australia's economic performance and to the capacity of employers, especially small and medium businesses, to operate and deliver services. Second, public debate often conflates very different concepts. Temporary migration, net overseas migration, international students, the permanent migration program. That confusion matters because they are very different policy levers and they have very different economic and social impacts. And third, ACCI's position is that Australia needs a skilled migration system that is employer-driven, evidence-based, easier to navigate, and better integrated with domestic training, housing, infrastructure, and broader planning. Let me start with that second point, because it helps put everything else in context, and let's face it, migration is really hard to talk about both accurately and simply. So I want to put some things on the record. Australia's migration settings are still being debated in the shadow of the post-pandemic population rebound. But the evidence also shows that that surge is moderating. ABS data released in late 2025 showed net overseas migration, the NOM, was 306,000 in 2024-25, down from 429,000 the previous year. That's a fall of almost 30%. Now, headlines make it sound like migration rebounded, but in reality, the numbers kept coming down. Treasury simply revised how fast they thought that that decline might happen. The other important distinction that we need to unpack here is the difference between net overseas migration, NOM, and permanent migration. Think of Australia's net overseas migration number as a bucket. Water flows into the bucket from different jugs. We have an international students jug, we have temporary skilled workers jug, a working holiday makers jug, other temporary workers. And we have a smaller jug of very highly skilled, in-demand migrants who are granted permanent visas from offshore. And there are also some Australians in the bucket, and I'll come back to them in a moment. The people in that bucket are largely there because of Australia's needs. Those temporary visas are mostly demand-driven, responding to labour markets, education demand, and economic conditions. Each year, government then looks into that bucket and asks 2 questions. What does Australia need in terms of skills and labour supply? And what do we think we can sustainably support in terms of infrastructure? Not just housing, roads, schools, hospitals, childcare. From that analysis, it then sets the permanent migration planning level, which for 2026-27 is 185,000 places, or 185,000 people who will be granted permanent residency. Now, importantly, about 70% of the people granted permanent residency are already in the bucket. They're already living and working here on other visas. The remaining 30% are those highly skilled offshore migrants who are brought in directly and granted immediate permanent residence because their skills are in such high demand. So before we can measure the level of water in the bucket, we also have to account for everyone who leaves Australia for 12 months or more within a 16-month period. And that includes everyone. That's Australian and New Zealand citizens, permanent residents, students who go home after study, anyone who departs long-term. And once we subtract those long-term departures from the long-term arrivals, what we're left with is net overseas migration. And that's also why we have Australians in the bucket, because NOM includes Australian citizens who return after spending 12 months or more overseas. So in simple terms, NOM is just a population measure. How many people came to Australia and stayed long-term, minus how many people left and stayed away long-term. and understanding the norm matters because it exposes a basic misunderstanding in the public debate. Migrants are often blamed for outcomes that flow from demand-driven population change and long-standing infrastructure shortages, not from an uncontrolled permanent migration program. Skilled migrants aren't flooding in. They are being selected to fill gaps that Australia can't meet on its own. So confusing NOM with permanent migration replaces a discussion that should be about planning with misunderstandings about how skilled migrants contribute value to Australia's economy and services. Now, let's narrow this right down to the perspective of business, because that's Aki's remit. For employers, and particularly small and medium businesses, it's often a practical question of whether they can recruit the workers needed to keep operating, deliver products and services, and grow. So Aki's 2025 Small Business Conditions Survey found that 35% of small businesses are struggling to attract and retain skilled workers, and our recent fuel survey actually showed that those numbers are likely to increase. The pressure is particularly acute in certain industries: construction, manufacturing, healthcare. Those shortages matter because they constrain economic activity directly. Businesses may reduce hours that workers can work, delay expansion, or even lose contracts when they can't find workers. So that's the key point we need to make. Skilled migrants fill skills gaps that exist in the domestic market. But in addition to that, there is also strong evidence that well-targeted skilled migration delivers positive economic outcomes for everyone, for the nation. For example, research by Australia's Centre for Population, working with the OECD, shows that regions with a higher migrant share tend to have higher wages overall. In fact, a 10% increase in the migrant share is associated with about a 1.3% increase in regional wages. It also finds that higher migrant inflows are linked to stronger employment outcomes for Australians. A 1 percentage point increase in migrant inflows is associated with a roughly 0.5% increase in employment among Australian-born workers, with no negative wage effects identified. Now look, none of this means that the community concerns should be dismissed. Aki recognises that pressures on housing, infrastructure and services are real, and that migration contributes to demand. But it would be wrong to suggest that skilled migration alone explains Australia's housing challenges. The National Housing Supply and Affordability Council reported in 2025 that Australia completed around 177,000 dwellings in 2024, while underlying demand was estimated at around 223,000 dwellings. So that's a gap of approximately 46,000 dwellings in a single year. What that points to is a structural housing supply challenge. Importantly, many of the occupations needed to build more homes, including construction trades, engineering-related professions, are themselves experiencing workforce shortages. So the policy challenge is to better align migration, housing supply, infrastructure, workforce planning, and construction capacity. The benefits of migration are often national, but the pressures are felt locally and immediately. And that's why planning, transparency, and public confidence matter. Aki's view is that the core of the skilled migration system should continue to be employer-sponsored migration, because it is anchored in real jobs, real employers, and genuine workforce demand. But businesses also tell us that the system is too complex, too slow, and too costly. Employers have to navigate labour market testing, occupation lists, skills assessments, salary thresholds, sponsorship obligations, and compliance reporting, often with limited clarity about how decisions are being made.
Can I ask you to just bring it to an end, because we really want to ask some questions. We've got your submission as well,
paragraph.
but just, yeah, thank you. Sorry to
Not at all. No,
because I'm looking at the
forward to
time
talking
as
to you
well.
too.
We've got a time frame.
Absolutely. So this is why Aki supports practical reforms, including faster and more transparent visa processing, reducing unnecessary complexity, improving responsiveness to labour market needs, reviewing the Skilling Australians Fund levy, and better integrating migration policy with domestic skills and workforce planning. I look
Thank you
forward to
very
your
much,
questions.
and apologies once again.
Not at all.
I just feel that when we have a discussion, we get much more out of it, and we've got the submission that you've put in, so thank you for all of that. Can I just kick off with a very quick couple of questions? One is, I'm only going to ask you because of our previous witness. We asked the question of different organisations, etc. We had the Farmers Federation in earlier, yourselves in now, are all saying that we have a shortage of skilled migration and targeted certain areas. one of the arguments from the previous witnesses was that there is self-interest. How do you debunk that? And I know you've got plenty of evidence in your submission that you've given us.
No, not at all.
And I apologise for asking that question.
Not at all. No, it's an interesting premise, I think, because the idea of self-interest suggests that there is something nefarious in a business wanting to staff itself, and that's certainly not something that we can agree with. Businesses are providing the services and the products for the nation that the market requires and that society requires, and to fill those shortages of workers that we have, it's important that we have people with the skills to be able to undertake those jobs. And so perhaps the former witness was talking about us having self-interest as opposed to the businesses. And to debunk that, I would say that our role as a peak body and a representative of business is to say we have an ecosystem, and that ecosystem includes business, and business is really important for keeping the economy going. And I'm really proud to be able to represent those businesses so that we can keep the economy and society and communities going. So if that's self-interest, then I don't see it.
Thank you. I take it the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry represent small businesses, medium businesses, and the very big, large, big businesses.
Correct.
I'm more concerned about the small businesses and the medium businesses. In what ways are current skilled migration settings over complex, costly, unpredictable? How could that be streamlined for those smaller businesses who have the absolute need of a skilled worker, can't source the labour locally? How do they navigate these complex areas? And I suspect that's where you guys come in and assist them. But what can we do as governments to streamline that for those smaller businesses? I can understand if you're a big business, you've got huge HR departments and can engage lawyers and all sorts of things.
You've hit the nail on the head. So the problem for small businesses in particular is the lack of staff to actually do that work, and that's not a skills shortage, that's a capacity issue within small businesses. They don't usually have HR departments. So it does take quite a long time and quite a lot of understanding and knowledge to be able to bring on a skilled worker. And I will be honest with you, we hear from our members regularly that, particularly in something like construction, the system doesn't get used because it's too complex. And that's a real problem because we actually have shortages that could be filled by migrant workers in those spaces. So I do think that the migration strategy was a good start, and I think you may be aware, but Aki is a member of the Ministerial Advisory Council on Skilled Migration. We really appreciate the opportunity to contribute in that forum. And we've progressed the skilled migration strategy quite a lot, I think, over the last couple of years. But there's still quite a lot to do. We are particularly concerned about the Skilling Australia Fund, the way that is both structured and the high cost of it. And with the new laws that came in recently around exploitation, which we support. Let me rephrase that, we do not support exploitation. To be clear, what we support is the laws that make sure that exploitation can't happen. What that does, however, do is allow a migrant worker to move from one employer to another, and that's important if they're being exploited, but it also allows a loophole for another employer to come in and poach without having to pay the Skilling Australia Fund fee, and it's non-refundable for the original employer. So
just on that point, what can we do in that area? Because we're hearing quite a bit of that.
Yeah, and it's a problem. What we would like to see done is A, for the amount to be reduced, but B, for the cost to be passed on to the next employer, and that way the loophole goes away because it's no longer a perverse incentive for both the migrant and the employer.
Thank you. Mr Reblow.
Thank you, Chair.
Deputy Chair.
And thank you for being here today. I have two sort of themed questions. The first is in relation to, we're obviously talking about skilled migration, but that's because there's a need that Australians aren't able to fulfil. And so I'm interested in your views about whether you think that enough is being done to train and engage Australians. I know you said you're on the Ministerial Advisory Council of Skilled Migration. I don't know if that's something you've raised through that process. Recently, we had an announcement by the government to reduce employer incentives for employing apprentices and trainees by about $300 million. I'm interested in your view on, are we doing enough on the Australian side, which when we don't do enough there, we see an increased need that we need to go overseas for.
So I do think that they are separate issues largely, but I'd like to address them separately as a starting point at least. So on the question of whether we are doing enough to train Australians. So Jobs and Skills Australia has a framework for the drivers of skills shortages, and one of those drivers is long skills gaps. Long skills gaps can only be addressed by providing long training or by bringing in migrant workers. So if you need an immediate outcome when you have a skills gap that is being driven by those long skills gap shortages, then you can't afford to wait 3 or 4 years for an Australian to be trained up. We need those workers now, and that's where migration becomes really, really valuable. If you have a short skills gap, and short skills gaps are of a couple of months, from a couple of weeks to a couple of months, then you can be looking to shorter forms of training. And that's something that we're really interested in, and we are aware that the Productivity Commission has been doing work on in terms of how we can better upskill Australians in a more immediate sense, both in the workplace and also through the vet training system. And then you've got other forms of shortage drivers. So putting that aside, are we doing enough to fill those long shortage gaps? And I think the answer there does, to some degree, tie into the issue that we have with apprentices. So obviously, it's disappointing for us that that large employers are no longer going to receive incentives. We know that large employers of apprentices and trainees are often the employers that are more likely to employ diverse cohorts, more likely to have training programs aimed at diverse cohorts, and also that they are more likely to train more capacity into the system than they are actually available for themselves. So that is something we're really worried about, because we do believe that capacity will go down because of that. Sorry, did you?
I just wanted to ask, when you say large employers, do you mean businesses that employ a large amount of employees, or do you mean large businesses by size?
I see what you mean. Yes, no. So the large employers, as defined by the apprenticeship incentive system, small, medium, and large, and it's over 200 employees. Okay. Yes. So those kinds of employers are the ones that tend to do these larger training programs, and we are very worried that that capacity will reduce because it won't be in those businesses' best interests. They are more likely to have shareholders. Those shareholders are more likely to say, this isn't in the interests of the bottom line, cut it off. Yeah. And that's going to be a worry for the national interest.
And then the second themed question I had, you spoke about the fact that while it's right to say that skilled migration contributes to sort of housing pressure and stuff, it's not the only reason that we're in this situation. There are different types of migration, obviously, that are not skilled, and some, as we're seeing through this inquiry, who are skilled but they're not fulfilling the skill shortages that we need. Given the pressures that we've got on housing, on infrastructure and everything else, would you support, or would ACCI support, a reduction in migration levels so long as it is not affecting those areas of skill shortages that we need?
I can't actually see how that would be possible, because certainly at the moment, those skills shortages are widespread and in some cases, particularly in areas, quite acute. But more to the point, there's a lot of them.
So just to clarify, I'm not saying we reduce the amount of people who are filling skill shortages, but the people who are not here fulfilling skill shortages, would a reduction in that be appropriate, acknowledging your point, which, you know, migrants can contribute to some of these pressures, but we don't want to touch the skilled people.
So obviously ACCI is a business organisation. We represent businesses, so that is our wheelhouse. And so the other aspects of the skilled migration system are less what we are involved in talking about. Certainly the family and related visas are there, and they're there for a reason, but I couldn't really comment on that because I haven't spoken to my committees about it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms Louise Miller-Frost.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's been very informative. So a couple of questions. You were here in the room for the previous witness who said that part of the issue or part of the attraction of migrant workers is that they're more vulnerable and can be exploited compared to Australian workers, and the examples used were sort of aged care and agriculture. What's your experience in that area?
Well, that would be illegal. That would be a crime, and we do not support that in any way, shape or form. It is essential that we have the guardrails in place so that that doesn't happen. We are fully supportive of a migration system that both fills skills needs and protects workers, because that is who we are as a country. And so that is, I thought her comments in that space were interesting, but they're certainly not within the guardrails of the law that the country has set up.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we were going to see some of the construction industry people this afternoon, but they've been rescheduled. But in terms of the data around construction workers being part of the migrant intake, and some of the areas that we have heard from previously, they've said that the intake for skilled workers in construction is relatively low, but also that there was a need for almost a semi-skilled level, and then the examples that I think were used were concreter and scaffolder, which are not, you know, it's not a plumber or electrician, but it's something that... Is that what you're seeing, or what? Yeah.
So what we are seeing is that not just in construction, but across a broad range of industries, there's been gaps that and occupations that have fallen through those gaps that are actually essential. So I think you were talking to the agriculture people this morning, and that's a big issue for them, that they have a number of occupations on the list that, that aren't on the list but are actually essential that they can't get Australians to fill. It is the same in the construction industry. Excuse me. So in the sense that we are aware that there are occupations particularly that are named lots of different things. That's part of the problem, and so they don't end up being eligible because the name that's used in a job ad is different to what is on the... which is just a really unfortunate reason to have job shortages. And this is part of the complexity of the system, right? That there are these unintended consequences in very well-intended situations. So yes, we are aware of that. Whether or not we would support another visa category is a different question. We are all for the system being simplified and streamlined. So I would like to see a situation where the occupation shortage list is fine-tuned, honed to the very, very best version of it that we can have, so that those gaps aren't allowing occupations to fall through, rather than necessarily a new visa category. But it's something that I'd be interested to have further conversations with my committees about, because it is an interesting question.
No, thank you. And just one more question. In terms of your organisation or your research, do you do any work around kind of demographic predictions, ageing population, what our needs are likely to be in the future for workforce?
We don't. We're certainly aware of research done by other organisations.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. My question goes, I'll go to graduates and student visas, international student visas. How can we better support international graduates as skills talent, that pipeline of coming through for skilled talent? And what better mechanisms can we use for international students who are studying here in Australia and graduate in areas where we have shortages, to streamline them into occupations that we need to fill in Australia?
That's a really, really good question. One of the challenges with, and this is actually true for both international students and domestic students, one of the challenges is that it is difficult for students in higher education particularly to be able to undertake learning within a workplace. So the Fair Work Act is designed so that students can't be exploited when they do an internship. That's great. We definitely don't want exploitation under any circumstances. But the challenge with that is that when a person does go into the workforce, a student that is, and they go into an organisation, they are required to not be productive. That's one of the criteria. And they have to be receiving marks or credit for the work that they do within a formal unit or course setting. So if they do anything within the organisation that is something that an employee could do, that counts as being productive, and therefore they should be getting paid. But if they're getting paid, then all of the same IR law applies to that student directly.
Which is the same for local students as well.
And this is the same across the board, yes.
Yeah.
And so this is a baseline issue. So in terms of what we can do, this is a baseline issue. So that makes it incredibly difficult to actually convince organisations to bring in international students or domestic students, because especially if it's a small business and they bring in one or two interns who then become employees because they pay them, they could go over the threshold and become a medium-sized business, which means that they are subject to a whole range of different requirements and compliance checks. So it really stymies the system of getting students, work experience. That's the first thing. When we look then specifically to international students, of course, the international students are here to study, not to work. That is the goal, for them to get that world-class education that Australia is well known for. And while they are studying, lots of them do work, and they can work up to 20 hours in a fortnight. And so the challenge with that is that isn't very much, and if they are working in a job that is going to give them actual skills that they could then use in Australia when they leave, they can't get further experience. And they also have to be very, very careful that if they go into an internship situation, that they don't breach that 20 hours.
I'm talking more after they've graduated.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's a completely different question.
So you've got an international student.
Yes.
They've come here to study a particular vocation or get a degree. That degree happens to be in an area where we have a shortage. How can we streamline those people into filling some of those positions?
Well, fortunately, the answer I just gave you accidentally still applies. So part of that...
I'm pleased that you did give that answer too, because it gives us an understanding of how it all operates as well.
So part of having more people stay and having, and this is important, having employers employ international students is about the experience that they get while they are a student.
Okay.
Okay, so We know that employers are concerned, anxious about postgraduate student visas. They think that it's going to be complicated to hire a student. So part of that is actually about education for employers, and that's something that people like ourselves are pretty good at. So that's one thing. But part of it is also helping students, while they are students, gain the skills that will allow them to walk with confidence into an employer's office and interview and convince them that they are the right person for the job. And that is actually an Australian-specific thing. It's very cultural, the way that Australia does interviews, the way that we write resumes, the way that we do our entire employing system is different to any other country. And it's hard to actually be an international student trying to navigate that system if you haven't had any training. The chances are the employer is going to say, you don't understand our system. And that is the value of international students becoming the future members of our workforce, is that they get that opportunity. But are we actually taking greatest advantage of that? I don't think we are yet.
Thank you. And my very last question is, in terms of a debate that's been taking place at the moment, not just here in the political world up here in Canberra, but across the nation.
Indeed.
And hearing our last witness as well, so there's some arguments that numbers have to be cut. Some talk about drastic cuts, others say stopping altogether. And I suppose, and what we're looking at is the more reasonable, targeted migrant. What are the dangers in this discussion? And I've given you the three scenarios. One is that we have a discussion going on that we've got far too much immigration. It's putting pressures on Australians who are here. The other one is cutting the numbers, and the third one is basically looking at targeting in a better, more streamlined way. Do you see any dangers in this discussion, and which direction should we be taking as elected members of Parliament to ensure that we don't go off the rails? Is basically the question.
I do think that there are dangers. So one of the dangers is that the debate itself is a challenge for migrants who are currently overseas hearing this debate. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the sentiment analyses that the university sector does, for example, but there are businesses who analyse the chatter of potential international students from all over the world to see how much they are paying attention to the debates within countries like ours. And they are. They are paying attention, and the commentary is not complementary towards the way that Australia treats migrants. And that has an impact on who comes, and it has an impact on how they feel before they come and when they arrive. And we are wanting a system that is absolutely optimised for the nation. And how can we have that if, in fact, the people who we are hoping to attract into these jobs start off from a position of thinking, we're not really wanted, it's not going to be comfortable there, people are not going to be welcoming. So that is a real danger just through the rhetoric that is being discussed. The other danger that I think that we need to be aware of is the danger of language. And as I said in my opening statement, we have various different terms that are being used, often synonymously is the word I'm looking for, thank you. And they aren't interchangeable. You can't use the nom and interchange it with the permanent migration level, because they're actually completely different things and they overlap at the same time, which is confusing, but it's still true. And so when we hear terms like the migration numbers, that is a meaningless term until you know which version of the migration numbers are actually being referred to. And I think it really can lead the media and therefore Australians to feel that there is more migration than there actually is. The numbers are what matters, not the rhetoric, and that's not what people are actually referring to when they are concerned a lot of the time.
Thank you. And Deputy Chair.
Thank you very much. Just a very quick question on that. You spoke about the sentiment survey, I think it was.
Yes.
Are you aware of... You said that the debates at the moment are resulting in sort of people having a negative view of Australia. Is that translating to a reduction in the amount of people applying for, I guess, visas or applying to migrate here?
So for that particular example, I can't speak for anything outside of international students coming into higher education because that's a specific example. And it's also difficult to know. We certainly are seeing reduced numbers of international students and reduced numbers of applications, but it's hard to know how much of that is due to sentiment and how much of it is due to the new rules around how many international students universities are allowed to have.
And just in relation to yours, the small businesses that you represent,
yes,
or all businesses actually, do you think that businesses would benefit more from a migration system that's focused on prioritising those full-time skilled workers in high productivity sectors rather than the broader temporary migration measures? Or the intakes?
What we would like to see most of all is a migration system that's balanced and sustainable, and so within that what we're looking for the most is employer-sponsored migration. That is typically going to be in those full-time and highly productive industries. That said, it's an ecosystem, and so I wouldn't want to comment on those areas that are outside of my own scope.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to an end of this session. Thank you very much for your contribution. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you for coming today. You'll be sent a transcript of your evidence, and you'll also have an opportunity to request any corrections to any transcription errors that you may feel have been made. If you've been asked to provide any further additional information, please send it to the Secretariat, or the Secretariat will be in touch with you if there is anything further that we need to provide. And if we require to speak to you again, we may be in touch, and vice versa. If there's something that you wish to feed through to us, please get in touch with our Secretariat. On that note, thank you very much for appearing before us today.
Thank you very much.
I'll just, can we just switch off for a minute? Welcome, and thank you. I now welcome witnesses participating in a small business discussion to give evidence. The witnesses participating today are from the Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman and the Council of Small Business Organisations Australia via video conference, who are online, I think. Yes? Excellent. Now, for the Hansard record, would you please state your name and capacity in which you appear before the committee? Just your name and capacity, and we'll start off with the Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman.
Thank you, Chair. Linda McAlary-Smith, the Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman.
Thank you.
Aidan Storer, the Executive Director of Policy and Advocacy.
Excellent. And now to the Council of Small Business Organisations.
Hello, my name's Adele Sutton. I'm the Head of Policy at COSBOA.
Thank you so much for appearing before us today. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and it attracts parliamentary privilege. Thank you for your submissions to the inquiry, and I'll now invite each organisation to make a very short opening statement of no more than 2 minutes, if you could keep it to that, and then we'll proceed to just an informal Q&A and a discussion, which I feel we can achieve far more out of than listening to a read statement. You may read your statement if you like, but just keep it very short. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep mine extremely brief. I'm keen to talk with you today about the small business experience in navigating the complexity and the cost of the system, and also the need for skilled workers. So I'm very happy to take the committee's questions. Thank you.
Ms Adele Sutton.
Yes, thank you. I just have a short speech, hopefully won't take too much time. So thank you very much for the opportunity to appear today on behalf of COSBO and the nearly 2.7 million small businesses across Australia. They don't just contribute a third of national GDP and employ over 5 million Australians. They are the economic backbone of every community, especially the 770,000 small businesses in regional and rural Australia. It is important to recognise that around 1/3 of small businesses are owned by migrants, and they add diversity, resilience and innovation to Australia's economy, as well as playing a vital role in creating jobs and opportunity in local communities. Skill shortages are acutely felt by many small business owners who want to hire locally first, but sectors such as construction, hairdressing, hospitality and professional services face chronic shortages that cannot be solved through domestic recruitment alone. Small businesses value the skilled migration programme because it helps them access the people, capabilities and ideas they need to grow, innovate and serve their communities. However, the current settings of the skilled migration programme make it feel inaccessible to many small operators. The bureaucracy and red tape of the visa system, especially for employer-sponsored visas, is a real cost burden for small businesses seeking to sponsor migrants. Expensive visa nomination and application fees, as well as significant training levies, make the process prohibitive for many aspiring small business sponsors, and difficulty in accessing the programme is further compounded by duplicative bureaucratic requirements, together with opaque and unpredictable processing times for small businesses already under pressure from rising costs and other significant compliance obligations. Our message is simple. Australia needs a skilled migration system that is workable for businesses of all sizes, not just the largest ones, and we need a more proportionate, accessible and responsive system that helps small businesses fill genuine skill gaps, supports productivity and keeps small businesses in both metropolitan and regional areas viable for the longer term. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I might kick off with a couple of questions. Basically the question is very similar to the one that I just asked our previous witness. In terms of obviously small businesses, medium businesses, then you've got the large-scale businesses. That larger end, even though it's still a complex issue, employ lawyers, HR departments, etc. So the smaller businesses and the medium businesses, in terms of the complexity of skilled migration in the system, what is it that can be done most effectively to help these small businesses to navigate the migration system, and what elements of the skilled migration system could be just simplified simply without weakening, very important though, but without weakening the integrity of worker protections and the system itself?
I'm happy to proceed,
Yep.
Chair, if that works. Yes. So I think one of the key areas of complexity in the system is the system is designed for more sophisticated, well-resourced organisations, and that goes both to process but also the cost involved as well. Yep. In terms of application fees. One of the things we consistently hear from small businesses too is an opaqueness around the process of their applications. So there's uncertainty in terms of if they are actually putting in applications information in, how long for an employer-sponsored visa, how long it will take, what the next steps are, so that they can keep the applicant up to date, but also that they can plan from a business perspective as well. From a process perspective, one of the key challenges too is that small businesses, because they don't have access to dedicated HR teams or expensive lawyers or experienced agents in this space, it's not uncommon for them to make inadvertent errors throughout the process, and there's a very limited capacity for them to rectify that. So if it would be helpful for the committee, I'd like to take you through a brief case study of an employer who made an inadvertent error and that had a fundamental issue on the application. So it relates to a temporary skilled visa application where, with human error, they needed to provide evidence that they'd advertised the role locally first in 3 separate spots. They had actually done that, but when they put their application in, they neglected to include one of the advertisements. Following the request for information, they provided an email demonstrating that they had actually advertised in their 3rd place, and that was time stamped, so you could see that actually
just an error.
It was purely an error. And the employer was informed that in their notice of rejection that was not considered sufficient, and that a further reason, so it was declined, and a further reason for declining was in that 3rd advertisement, the actual salary wasn't specified in that advertisement. Now, it should have been, but in that advertisement, it linked to the SEEK advertisement where the salary was actually specified. So you had the advertisement here, which linked to the main advertisement effectively with SEEK, which had the salary, but they were rejected firstly because they hadn't proved in the initial instance that they'd advertised in the 3rd spot. When they provided evidence that they had actually done that, they were told, no, you can't rectify it because you failed to include the salary in that one. Now, whilst that's true in practice, it's not actually what would have panned out in practice for a job seeker.
Great example where it's not working.
Yes, and unfortunately, because the decision had actually been made, there was no ability other than going to the ART to overturn it. So something which was really simply an inadvertent administrative error, their only pathway was to go to the ART. When they explored that option, they were told it's over $3,000 application fee, and it would take around 2 to 3 years to get a decision. So that's a really clear example, I think, where whilst they didn't stick perfectly to the process, there was no ill intent behind it. Job seekers would have had access to the information that they needed, but the small business was in a position where it was declined because of those inadvertent errors, and they had no ability to rectify that because the decision had been made. I wanted to share that with the committee as a practical example.
And I think it's important for us to hear examples exactly like that, an area where just doesn't make any common sense.
Yeah.
Thank you. In terms of so basically simplifying the method that we use, ensuring that when errors like this are taken, when they do happen, that they're taken into account, or there is a way to be able to take a step back and rectify it and then come back, like most other agencies and areas that we have.
Yes.
So the stringency of the assessment step by step is a barrier to a lot of small businesses.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Steiner.
Can I just add to that, which might also, when you're thinking about potential ideas to rectify some of these issues, one of the challenges for a business is once they put an application in, it's quite opaque, as the Ombudsman had mentioned. You don't get an update on what stage the process is at. So if anything is causing a delay, then the applicant doesn't have the opportunity to act on that in a prompt manner. And obviously the employer and the skilled migrant themselves have to proactively follow up to try and find out where things are at. So one of the suggestions we did provide in our submission was around whether there could be a real-time application tracking system embedded into the system, so an applicant can actually find out in real time what stage is that process actually at, and if it does show any sort of flags that they need to action things, then that can be done in a much more prompt proactive way. And I understand that the Canadian government has something of that nature in their system called a check your status tool, so that does give an opportunity for an applicant, and that might be one sort of practical measure that could really give, really enable the applicant to see where their process is at for their planning, but also to actually take action along the way to move things along if that's needed.
Thank you. I might go to swap it around a bit now and go over to Louise Miller-Frost. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I note in your submission there was a commentary that the occupation lists don't really reflect what the need is on the ground. They're inflexible, they don't keep time, and we have heard from previous witnesses, both today and previous days, about not just the actual skilled migrants and the job titles, but also the need for semi-skilled workers as well. And the examples that I used were in the construction industry, we don't just need plumbers and electricians, we need scaffolders and concreters and those sorts of things. Can you give a bit of commentary on how you would think that we would address particularly that timeliness, but also if there's any particular areas that you think we need to be looking at?
It's a really good point, and I think it's one of the challenges is when businesses, so from a small business perspective, they're just looking for their staff. They're looking for capable staff who are able to do the job that's needed, and that may well be required some on-the-job training or further qualifications if you like, and our small businesses will always preference having someone coming in who can hit the ground running if they can, because of various restrictions obviously from a resourcing perspective. But yes, we would support the view that often it's labour, if we can use that term in a general sense. It's a person. It's a person that they need to do the work. And I think particularly as businesses are continuing to evolve in the current environment as well, what a business might need today might be very different to what they need in 6 months' time and what have you. So having very prescriptive and prescriptive lists of who you're allowed, what types of roles you're allowed to hire for can constrain that, because what a business needs today might be very different if a business is exploring new sectors, moving into new sectors or innovative ways of working. Being able to be flexible around that would be really important. So I think that broader question of what's the labour need of the business, which, as you've said, goes to both skilled workers and semi-skilled or not as technically skilled workers as well, because they provide such an essential piece of the puzzle as well too.
And look, I recognise that obviously you represent a very broad number of sectors in the small business area, but in terms of looking forwards, does your organisation do any planning around sort of demographic changes, workforce changes, skill training, that sort of, and actually are you able to predict forward what might be needed in the future?
It would be more the course that we would rely on other departments and agencies to do that, such as DUA, for example, in terms of forecasting, and the Treasury as well, rather than us having being resourced to actually do that sort of forecasting ahead.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Deputy Chair has the floor.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask you a similar question to the question that I put to the previous panel. So I'm interested in, we're talking about skilled migration, and obviously the skilled migration is there to fill a shortage, and that shortage is because we're not able to meet that at a domestic level. Do you think that we are investing sufficiently in training and engaging Australians? And I put that within the context. We've seen a reduction in particular of $300 million in the employer incentives for employing apprentices and trainees announced this week. How is that going to impact the businesses that you represent, and how does it fit within that broader context of trying to make sure we've got Australians who can do jobs as well?
I think from a small business perspective, they just need the people, and I think from a really practical perspective, they're less concerned about some of those big picture kind of questions and decisions. It's I've got a need for someone to do work for me right now, and how do I access that person? It is faster and cheaper to obviously access local staff. Also, also from a small business perspective, when you have a new employee coming on, there's costs and time involved in onboarding and training up and becoming part of the community, your workplace, and being a really productive contributor to that. So we know that when we're talking to the small businesses, they would love to hang on to staff as long as they can when they're performing well. So that can be one of the challenges with the visa settings too, is that once you have someone who's fully productive and working well, particularly in regional towns, our small businesses would love people who are really deeply embedded in their communities, be they local or they've moved to that area as well, because once they put roots down in the communities, it's a bit harder to leave, for example, and that helps businesses from a retention and a attraction point of view as well. I think our small businesses are focused on the problem that's right in front of them right now. So if they have a need for workers to help them right now, can I get access to those people? And if I can't, what's my next best available option? Whilst, of course, the decisions of government and policy setting are absolutely critical, I think our small businesses right across the sector are very much focused on what do I need today or what do I need next week? And that's obviously one of the challenges that they have, because ensuring that they've got the right labour workforce is just one of many things that they're juggling in terms of both from the core part of the business that they're in, the reason why they've gone into small business in the first place, their passion or their skill or their expertise, but then also the specific obligations around compliance of the business of running a business, so to speak.
I think Ms Sutton wants to add something as well. I've noticed her.
No, thank you. I was just going to say, what we hear, COSBO are our members are peak bodies, and what we hear from a lot of those associations is just about completion rates for apprentices that are, just consistently declining, and so that pipeline just isn't coming through. And I think as well, we've also heard from our members in terms of the Skilled Australian Levy, which small businesses have to pay as part of this visa process. That money isn't necessarily coming back to the industries that it's taking from. And again, so as we've seen that there's been some cuts to apprentice programs, and particularly in things like hairdressing and hospitality, I think there's quite a bit of disquiet about the fact, people who are sponsoring are paying a lot of money into these funds, but they're not seeing that money coming back to try and attract and train apprentices.
Thank you. That's very useful. And just on that apprenticeship side of things, some of the evidence that we've collected in the course of doing this inquiry has suggested that when we are getting people coming over to fill skill shortages, whether it's a small or larger business, sometimes some of the issues is that they might be technically qualified and they might have completed whatever training they need to do, but the practical on-the-job work there is still a gap, and so small businesses have been telling us that they often have to, further skill them, despite the fact that they technically meet the requirements. Do you think that, from a small business perspective, you'd support looking at integrating an immigration program into our apprenticeship program, where we can actually bring people in and put them through apprenticeships so that they're actually working and training with Australian small businesses, so that afterwards, they don't have to go through that retraining, and then obviously having some sort of government support to do that. Perhaps that's where some of the SAF levy can actually go.
If I may, I think historically there's been this gap, because I think there was an idea, okay, if you're coming from another country to do as an international student to be on a vet program, that you'll take those skills. It's the purpose is to take those skills back to your country. So it's really interesting to see now with the 485 program that there is that opportunity for people to come and study vet courses and then go on to stay to try and get that extra training. But yes, if that training was embedded somehow, so that the employment and the skills aspect is talking to the vet system and the training, then that would be I would imagine that would be very helpful indeed.
Thank you.
I think anything that can assist with workers being job ready when they are placed in a small business, irrespective of how they've got to that. So making sure that the person who's coming into work in the workplace has the best skills or can get the best training is really important.
Thanks.
Louise, okay. I'll ask a question that I've got a couple here. in terms of the link between skilled migration, business expansion, productivity, and so expanding a particular business and labour productivity, how important is the link between skilled migration and those areas? And what would the detriment be if we cut skilled migration?
I think one of the most important things, as I've said earlier, is around available labour to do the job. So when a business sees an opportunity, a growth opportunity, and perhaps it might be a new contract that they think they can secure, or they see a gap in the market where they are keen to sort of lean into that, it's having people who are skilled and ready to do that job as quickly as possible. So in terms of the role that skilled migration can play in that, of course, if there's availability and at the speed of it, so if businesses can access a skilled workforce as quickly as they can, is the most important thing. And I think from a small business perspective, if they've exhausted their attempts to secure a worker from a local worker, then skilled migration can play an important part in either supplementing their workforce or allowing them to grow their business. But often when small businesses are seeing growth opportunities, they want to move at pace. They want to be able to take advantage of that quickly. So that's one of the things that needs to be considered as well as part of the what you're considering in terms of how well the system's working as well.
Thank you. Ms Sutton, would you like to add to that?
Just in terms, I think the complexity of the system and the difficulty and cost for small businesses trying to access those workers through the current migration settings is actually probably hampering productivity, just the actual process. In a former life, I did actually work I was a registered migration agent, and a lot of my clients were small businesses. So I've first-hand experience of how frustrating that process is. For those businesses who oftentimes already have somebody in their business that might be on a working holiday visa that has, skilled in their home country, and they know them, they know they're hard workers and they've got the skills and they trust them. And so, and then often coming at the last minute, how do I sponsor this person? And then becoming very frustrated by the system, if that worker's even actually on the list. So I think what would be most productive is trying to streamline some of those processes and having a right-sized process for small businesses to be able to access the system and get those workers in.
Thank you. Streamline is what we're hearing continuously. The other question is, what can governments do to maintain onshore graduates, and in terms of international students who are coming over, studying a particular skill vocation where there's a real need? What can we do to maintain those people on a pathway to permanent residency and to fill those gaps, and of course onshore graduates as well? Who'd like to take that? Ms Sutton?
Yeah. Also, I'll talk from personal experience. I first came to Australia on a working holiday visa. I subsequently went back to the UK. I actually came back as an international student and studied at the College of Law in Sydney and qualified as an Australian lawyer, and eventually came back on a 189. But that whole process probably took me 7 or 8 years. Was very complicated, and there's no easy pathway to do that onshore. And so, really, it's even for, like I said, when I've looked at applicants who've gone to train in the vet system, there's no real proper pathway with training visas. Like I said, the 485's opened up, but then migrants need to be able to get that work experience, and it's not guaranteed. Even if you've got a skills assessment, it's not a guaranteed pathway that's actually going to get you any employment. So there needs to be some sort of system really for matching up students with employers.
Again, the word streamlined we need.
Yeah, and so that there is a pathway rather than people just hopping onto so many different visas, which is costly and expensive, and it doesn't really target applicants with employers.
If I go back to the part of my question on international students who are here studying a particular degree in an area where we have a shortage, what can we do to keep them here as well. And I'll add to that question as well, targeting international students who want to come here to particularly study in areas where we have a need.
I think industry-based learning within the study can be quite important with that as well. So in the duration of their study, that there's opportunity for students who are studying to then be able to work in Australian businesses as well too. I think that helps from a job-ready perspective, but also from firstly a willingness of the student to want to stay in Australia as well, to see what opportunities are actually available, because that's an important part of it as well too. Not only are they able to, but do they want to as well.
Thank you. Deputy Chair, any other questions?
I think the only other question I had was, so some of the new announcements we've seen around skills recognition. So there's been new funding that's been announced by the government for the Trades Recognition Australia. Is that something that benefits the businesses that you represent, and how confident are you that that's going to help?
I think our small businesses always welcome things that make it easier for them to get access to staff, and particularly the skilled staff. It's obviously early days in terms of that, but I'm confident that if small businesses, if it's appropriate for their workplace and what they need, that they'll be looking to take advantage of all things that are available to them, including policy decisions and programs and supports that are available.
And specifically on the announcement, obviously the big focus for this one is around housing and building construction. And as you're probably aware, building construction is a sector that is dominated by small businesses by number. So certainly in that sector, I mean, it'd be great to see that sort of extended in other areas where small businesses operate, but certainly that's a sector where it's quite prominent.
Thank you. Ms Sutton, would you like to add to that?
Well, Master Builders Australia are one of our members, and I understand they're looking into that now and will be giving evidence, so I'd probably leave that for them to comment on.
Okay, thank you. Anything further? Being no further questions, I thank you for appearing before us today. You'll be sent a transcript of your evidence, and you'll also have an opportunity to request corrections to any transcription errors that you may feel have been made. If you've been asked to provide any additional information, the Secretariat will be in touch with you on a due date and give you a due date after the transcript is available. So once again, thank you very much for appearing. That concludes our program today and our hearing program. I'd like to thank all our witnesses who appeared and gave us evidence today. To the members of the committee, thank you for appearing. And of course to Hansard for keeping accurate record. I declare this public hearing closed. Thank you.
Thank you.